If we could first stand and pledge allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay. Do we have any board discussion? Do we have any public discussion? Okay, we'll go right into the Village Center District bylaw. And where are we at with that, Adam?
This is our second discussion / listening session. We had one this time last week. We discussed it. There were some minor edits and things that were desired to be included, which were done and added to the draft that was sent around maybe Wednesday of last week. And I know Nathan had a few comments on those that, clarification and maybe rewording changes, but other than that, they are what they are in the version that you have.
Okay, so on the revisions, does anybody on the board have questions that were sent out last Wednesday on the revisions?
My only question was, did we cover the percentage of glazing? Did we decide that 40 was the right number?
We talked a lot about...
Yeah, we said we didn't want to do 60.
Yeah, and we talked about the range, so I put it in there as the 40 to 60 range,
Okay.
because that was kind of what we had talked about. The discussion sort of revolved around 60 being excessive or bordering on excessive, and 40 being what the example that we had was. So, I put it in there more as let's put it in there, see if somebody has a visceral reaction for or against it.
So 40% is aligned with the diagrams that you showed, right?
Yeah.
And then 60 was, we said it was lots of glass, and we didn't want any more than that.
Yeah.
And this really only applied to the multiple building sections,
Correct.
right? Yeah, okay. So I'm good with that then.
I will note that on page 5, at the top, under 2, where we talked about the 5,000 square feet of gross floor area, and we talked about that for new buildings, but not for existing buildings. Nathan did send a comment questioning, everything becomes existing at some point. So what my proposal would be reuse of buildings existing at the time of the adoption of this bylaw, or something in that wheelhouse, so that so we're using the buildings that are here now, which is, I think, what a lot of the comment and discussion was, so that in 10 years, when somebody's built a new building, they're not like, oh, well, we can just, it's an existing building. We can start to alter it to meet that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Good point, Nathan.
Should we just throw a date on it, or will it go by?
Well,
adoption?
there's going to be a date,
We'll just throw like a year date on it or something.
Grandfather.
Yeah. As opposed to when the bylaw was adopted.
Well,
because then
but
bylaw
it'll-
might go through a revision and be readopted and whatever, so.
okay, yeah, we can do that. Yeah, as of
January 1st.
As of May 1st, 2015,
Or something like
Yeah.
that, yeah, it's fine. So quick, go build that building.
Any other questions, comments from the board?
What were the highlighted sections supposed to indicate?
Those were ones that we wanted to leave on as highlighted as we're going to talk about them, because we wanted to get public feedback specifically to the,
Get the public hearings and get their feedback.
yeah.
Well, the one highlight is to add the date, so that I don't forget to put it in there. And then I think the other highlight was, stuff that we talked about that was questionable.
And one of them was page 4, section C there, talking about the one-story buildings. And I mentioned this to Adam earlier, but it had people expressed to me that the difficulties that that might put on, say, like a bank or financial institution that doesn't want upstairs neighbors for security reasons. And I kind of didn't know, since we already made the exception for a bank can apply for a special permit for a drive-through, maybe a bank would warrant a single-story building. We could leave that out. And also just from construction and development experience, are we okay if someone just builds a second floor because we said they had to have one and then not occupy it, like just a fake second floor? Is that something that we were going for or wanted to ward against, or we're okay with? Just something for consideration.
Well, we do already have a bank, so.
We do.
Kind of be a moot point. I don't know how many banks we want in town center, but.
Just, it was brought up to me, so I was relaying it to
That's a good point, sure.
the board.
So, yeah, about the fake second floors, I think we want all functional, if we're gonna say two-story buildings. I think it's more about, it's about the development of the town center from a development pattern standpoint. It's not purely an aesthetic thing of having, 2 stories to
It's
look
supposed to
at.
contribute to the density.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was, I think, the goal. I mean, again, the history of it is, but that was something that came from the state sample bylaw, was that it needed to be second story. So that's what brought up the conversation, and I think that was the goal of the state model bylaw, was to spur on density and make sure you're using the land to its potential.
Yeah. Agreed.
So are you suggesting that we not prohibit single-story buildings?
No, I think we can prohibit single-story buildings. I mean, I'm just making you guys aware that it might have some impact on what kind of development you get or how willing people might be to come in and build there. But I think as far as the goals of what we've been trying to establish, or what we've been talking about anyways, was to build a village concept and the real sense of it, not just bring development in. So it's up to you guys. I just wanted to bring up the topic.
Yeah, I mean, we could add it as a special permit, with certain conditions or whatever, but, I wonder, is that, yeah, if it was a big, is banks really like about the only thing we can think of, or, I mean, I guess movie theaters too, there might be some issues there, but, so maybe it's, if we could add a special permit condition that said, unless there's something about the business that, makes.
But I think even movie theaters, with what you're talking about with two-screen, you're talking more of an art house movie theater that's not going to, Entertainment Cinemas or Lowe's is probably not going to come down and put in, a first-run movie theater. It's going to be someone who's trying to do some sort of, kitschy, one of, and so
like
the
a
front
drop
side
house.
of the movie theater, you might get the 2 stories. You might have an apartment or 2 or an office up above,
Right.
and then as you get back into the theater area, it's still gonna be 2 stories, but it's only gonna be the single use.
It's a good point. I mean, probably the number of customers that would be deterred by that is relatively small. I mean, there are banks with 2 stories. It's just, I can imagine, like you
Right, I
said,
was
some
gonna
of them.
say, doesn't the
would-
one in town have 2 stories?
Workers, yeah, it does. They have businesses on top.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure why the restriction would be
Okay.
that limiting. So, and on the theater, I think of like the Draft House, the Elm Draft
Yep.
House in Millbury has apartments
Yeah.
over the theater downstairs, and that seems to work out okay.
And it doesn't have to be housing, it could just be office space for that bank.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so if that's what we want to stick with, then did we want to add a line saying that the second floor use had to be occupied, or are we just going to leave it the way we have it?
I like it the way it is. I mean, the whole premise here was to kind of densify and not eliminate housing, but to segregate it and allow for more units, greater density, more foot traffic.
You're talking about adding a line that indicates the second floor needs to be occupied or used.
And not a facade?
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily have to be occupied, but it has to be occupiable,
But yeah,
and not a facade, is basically what you're saying, right?
Yeah,
a usable space.
Yeah, I think that's,
Usable space, yeah.
I mean, we could easily add that into,
I have a, yeah,
okay.
I'm letting them finish.
we could add that into
Yeah,
8B.
I got you.
Does that just go without saying?
Yeah,
though?
wait,
Not really. Happens all the time.
What about the same thing about the bottom space, then, if you just want to have housing, the bottom could be a facade too.
the what?
Yeah, housing's kind of
Valuable real
different,
estate,
though.
though.
You didn't hear what he said.
He said if someone just wants housing, they could make
ground
the
basement.
first floor false.
Are you guys?
I think you have a harder time cheaping out on the construction on the first floor than you do on the second floor.
Are you guys, the audience had a question, can I? Come on.
Sure.
Yep. And then
This is a
state
joint,
your name and address,
okay, I'm
please.
Rebecca Lantry, I'm the chairman of the Historical Commission. This is a joint meeting between the Historical Commission and the Planning Board, so we'd like to be included in your discussions. And there is an obvious reason why there should be a second story to these buildings, and that's because you are in a historic district. You are not just in a blank canvas slate. You are going to be wanting to fit into the facades of these people's residents that are in that area. And so that's why you want to go to a second-story facade. And that is why we have the Architectural Preservation District to go along with it, to protect and preserve what is there and to make those other buildings or anything that's added to it be of that same nature. Okay? So would you please include us in your discussions? And if we have our hands raised, we are still part of this meeting.
And I was just letting them finish their statement, and then I called you right up.
Okay.
But
it's
you need to
been-
open up your meeting?
What?
You need to open up your meeting? If it's a joint meeting, you need to open up yours.
Yes, I do. Okay. So this is Rebecca Lantry from the Lunenburg Historical Commission, and I would like to say that our meeting is also open at this time.
Okay, and you have a quorum? Can, okay?
I'm Lois Lewis, I'm from the Historical Commission as well. I wanted to clarify one point. We're talking about second stories. I understand the building cannot exceed 38 feet. Is that correct in height? And if it's 2 floors, where is this 5,000 square feet fitting in? Is it the first floor has the 5,000 square feet, and then if there's another floor, that has 5,000 square feet? And perhaps I'm missing something here, but I thought as well, I may not be totally up to date on the drafts, but as I understood it, each building would have 5,000 square feet. So what are you going to have here?
The way that it reads is that each use can't exceed
Use?
can't exceed
So
5,000 square
You're going to have a
feet.
building which basically has the 2 stories and 10,000 square feet in total.
Well, theoretically, you could have a 30,000 square foot building.
If you added another,
No, a 30,000 square foot building that maybe has a 15,000 square foot footprint and has 3 uses on the first floor and then 3 uses on the second floor.
Because if
have
it's
a
long
mini
enough-
mall, in other words. Basically, you could put a mini mall in where you had maybe a pizza market, a beauty parlor, you know, it's a mini
Yes.
mall.
yep,
Yes.
yep.
As long as it didn't exceed what on the ground floor?
As long as it fits within the setbacks and meets the design requirements within the bylaw and then within the APD.
So
And the
what would be
parking
the?
restrictions.
And the parking
What would be
requirements.
the floor square area then of the building?
I mean, the Passios is 50-some-odd thousand square feet. So theoretically,
That's
that,
not in the,
it is. It's
the
with- it's
district.
with- it's within the
It's
district.
going to be within the
Yes.
district.
Yeah,
Right,
both-
thank you.
Both previous school buildings are within the district.
Thank you.
It ends at TC, correct?
Yes.
That's where we ended it,
Yeah.
at TC.
And we talked about this at our last meeting as far as the size of the buildings that we can expect. A lot of the parcels are self-limiting based on their dimensions, their own square footage, and what kind of parking you can get on the site along with that building, because for any use that you end up putting in, you have a certain amount of parking that goes along with it. And to get the size of a large building and all the parking to go with it, that's not going to happen on 95% of these small parcels within the district that we're talking about. So, did you get people from the Historic Commission catch any of our last meeting, or should we go over some of that, or?
So one other comment, did everybody, before I get in, did everybody have a chance to pick up the materials on the table there that include a map of the district, which is pretty useful if you hadn't had a chance? It's good handy reference.
Yeah, I would like to add on to Damon's comment was that with about half of the properties within this district being less than half an acre, with 20,000 square feet, you're certainly not going to be getting very large buildings with the required parking and whatever other appurtenances there are required for the site itself.
You are aware that the old primary school building is a 40R, which allows it to be a 40-unit residence, or 40, it could go 40 stories. So we could have a Sunrise Towers there on that property because of its 40R designation.
I'm not sure it's still designated as
Yes,
40R,
it
is
is.
it?
I would not know that as a fact.
40Rs in town are the...
Tri-Town
It
and
was the Village, it is the Carousel Lane, it is the Whalum Drive-In, and it is the old primary school.
And again, talking to self-limiting,
And those were already passed through town meeting.
again, Ms. Lantry,
the-
we wouldn't have 40 stories there. Clearly, it goes with parking. You still need to have the parking to put whatever in there that you're going to put in there. And also, both of the school buildings which we're talking about are both town-owned. Both will be developed under a request for proposal, so the town will have to okay it. It's not just going out free market. So there's an additional level of protection as to what we'd get on either of those sites. And those are really the two large sites where these buildings are probably going to be able to take place. Do you want me to go through some of the review that I did last time, just briefly, as far as the square footage that we can expect? Just so
Might not be
everyone's
a
on the
bad
same
idea to
page.
just, yeah,
Okay.
quickly.
So if you picked up any of the material over there, there's a packet that has the Brooks House in the front of it. What I did was a little just schematic study. I used Brooks House as kind of a basis, just so we can picture a building that exists in the town center and open the dialogue of what's acceptable for a modification to a historic building. And along with that, I put some notes throughout the packet about roof lines, materials, certain lines of our village district that I specifically called out, like covered entries and percent glazing, things of that nature to kind of paint a picture of what a building could look like. Along with that, I studied the center of town properties within the district, looked at their square footage, looked at their shape, their frontage, and kind of found the limitations of what kind of development we could expect out of this bylaw. And one of the initial limiting factors of any of these properties is parking limitations. The parking limitations of every site is going to limit the build-out of that site because you need to provide the parking for the appropriate use that you intend to have. For that building that I show in the little packet there, that kind of depicts expanding the hypothetical Brooks House to 5,000 square feet on the first floor, with room up above for between 1 and 3 residences. So a building of that size, if the first floor were a retail space or an office space, and you had those apartments above, you would need around 18 to 24 parking spaces to go with that building to make it work. That covers 1 parking space per 400 square feet of area for the retail use, plus a parking space for each of your employees at the busiest shift, plus 2 parking spaces for each residence above. Again, the same building, say if a restaurant were on the first floor, in 5,000 square feet, you could probably get a 140-seat restaurant. And we've been outlining the requirements for the restaurant by seat, one parking spot per 4 seats, which is actually different from our bylaw now, which is per table, and that's how you can put 8 people at a table and end up with Asian Imperial parking situations. Hopefully this would alleviate that, but again, same building with these requirements, the residences above, you need 45 to 50 parking spaces to go with that building, which takes a lot of space. Each parking space takes about 300 square feet plus for each space. And that can quickly add up to being 3 times the square footage of the building. So you're going to need a lot of space to accommodate that building and the parking to go with it. And you're not going to see large developments on small sites because of that. And a lot of the dimensions of these sites in town, while some of them may be 2 acres and plus, just physical lot width, lot depth, just don't make for efficient parking layout, and it's going to be really, really hard to get those 50 spaces for any of the lots really in town. Probably talking about a handful out of the, 75 total?
78.
78 parcels total within the district. Only a handful of them can really accommodate significant parking on them. Also, use limitations. There's kind of a parallel between the building code, our zoning bylaw, and accessibility requirements. Because we have in our bylaw that there should be all 2-story buildings, the questions raised, what's going to happen with the second story, what use is going to go in there. Because of accessibility reasons, if it's going to be another commercial use or office use, what have you, you're going to need an elevator to get up there, which has a significant cost. You probably won't see elevators in buildings till you get closer to 10,000 square feet, 8,000 square feet, probably the smallest, really, because of just the cost, embodied cost going into that elevator. You don't want to put it in if you don't have to. And certainly if you're not going to get your return, then you don't do it. So with a 5,000 square foot footprint, what are you going to put up above it is probably going to be residential units again. And then there's a couple different layers to that. 2,000 square feet would be really large for a condo or apartment or owner-occupied space up above. So really, you're talking between 1 and 3 residents above a 5,000 square foot space. And then your accessibility requirements change as you go up. So 1 and 2 families, 1 set of code, 1 set of rise and run on the stairs and means of egress. Once you get to 3 units, it turns into a multi-family building. So the rise and run get more strict. It takes up more space for a staircase. You need more means of egress, and it's just, again, making it a little bit less feasible. Not that someone wouldn't do it, but as soon as you hit 4 units, you're required to have an elevator or accessible units to go along with it. So again, that's going to be a wall that you're pushing up against. So just in conclusion, due to the economies of scale and the actual lot dimensions of these lots in the center of town, you really, to get that 10,000 square foot building, footprint building, to really warrant your elevator and get a more intensive development on the site, you're going to need over 100 parking spaces to go with it. And that's really just not feasible on 95% of these sites. We're really talking about a 3-acre site plus being usable for a large building.
The campus-style development?
The campus style, yeah.
Any questions on that?
Hearing that, I kind of, it kind of leads me to wonder why it is that you looked at Lunenburg Center as the primary place that you wanted to develop. It doesn't accommodate itself. It is a historic.
Well, we're not, this is not an economic development plan. This is really a quality of life plan and solves some solutions for our building reuse needs, and I think really provides an opportunity to bring some life back to the town center, have some light commercial use that inspires community coming together and using the space and having the town center more, I don't know, more of a community space, and bring people into the historic area so they can be around the historic buildings, learn about the history. And
Right, but you're not looking at these buildings as the buildings that exist there now, having an adaptive reuse. You're looking at them as, let's take like this picture of the Brooks House.
Mm-hmm.
You're obviously looking at mowing the building down.
No.
And
No.
what you have there is
No, not at all.
a picture of
Yeah.
it. Not?
And if you flip through, so I took the mass of the building, and what I did was essentially took the porch area
And closed it in.
filled that in because it didn't change the massing of the building. The porch is probably a much later addition to the original structure anyways, because it's a completely different style of the rest of the building. And then what I really did was add on to the length of the building, hiding most of the new additions behind the older mass, and really tried to limit what I did to the front facade of it. And again, this was just to talk about it, to open this conversation about what you think is a reasonable reuse of an older building. That's clearly been modified over the years. It's certainly not a museum piece. And so this is to begin a discussion about what you think is a reasonable addition onto the building.
And I think that it's important, you make an important point. I think what we're trying to do is encourage adaptive reuse in a way that makes sense and opens up a somewhat wider variety than is allowable now. What Damon did was sort of at the request of the board is, what's the worst case scenario that we're looking at if someone buys an existing building and wants to completely modernize it and blow it out? So rather than, and he took a building that no one owns, and I know that everybody owns it, but it's not somebody's house, and so that no one thinks that anybody's going after it, and sort of tried to illustrate what, if he were charged with doing this, would be the result, and how the change might actually happen, and what the implications are, as opposed to every parcel we're going to go and we're going to knock this down. I think that what he laid out with the parking sort of illustrates that most people who want to come and occupy buildings in this area are going to probably not want to change the building too much, just for a cost factor. A lot of these houses would make interesting offices, restaurants, or small shops in one way or another for very specific, one-of situations. And I think that that's kind of what the use that the board has sort of whittled down to leans towards. And sure, you could take it and look at it anyway, and it can open itself up to a variety of different interpretations. And I agree that there's the possibility that someone could read it and say, oh, we can go in and do all these things. But I think that that's why the board was so insistent on working on the APD as well.
Right, but then it's also taking the first premise, and that is that all the houses within this area are commercial property, and they're not residential property, and they're not people that can basically watch the area that they call their neighborhood basically changed over into commercial property, and that, now suddenly I'm living next door to the bank when I used to live next door to another family in another home. And all that has a context into itself to those people who bought into it. People didn't buy, the Cunningham House because they wanted to go ahead, the Cunningham House meeting, the one on Leominster Road right off the thing, to go ahead and have their nice $1 million property suddenly become in a commercial district. I don't know how many people want to have that kind of house. So soon they'll abandon it. So if you start this process, you'll have a bunch of abandoned properties as bit by bit people are sitting there saying, I didn't intend to live here. This has been my family home forever and ever, and now all of a sudden I'm in a commercial district.
Well, it's a mixed-use district, we'll be clear about that. And it's not, as I just outlined, there's going to be people putting units above these buildings. They're not going to be vacant upstairs. Certainly people aren't going to be pushed out of living in the center of town.
They will be pushed out of living in the center of town if this is not the quality of life that they came here to buy.
That's what we're here to try to do.
And you also had a survey, and you asked these people when we began this whole process, what do you want done? And they were saying, I don't want anything done to the village district. I don't want this to change. And yet you pushed on forward to still say, village district, we're going to make commercial property out of residential property.
Can I make a comment here?
Please.
The charrette that was held with the public discussion on the town center, I remember going on the tour, and practically every single building that we pointed out had at one time been used as one or two or three different businesses.
Yes, in their history.
In mixed development.
Yeah,
There were
you can
people
go back
living
into
there.
the 17th century, and everybody had to find some means to have cash into their home. Besides, and the fact of the matter that they're in the center of the town, they weren't farmers. They were other entrepreneurs.
The intent here is to promote mixed use and to increase density and to provide walkability for a town center that's attractive and there's commerce in, where people come to town and they park their car and they walk around. People live in town, they appreciate being able to walk around to different businesses. This, I think, pretty much was what the center of town developed from.
And we're trying to recapture some of what we view as lost from the center of town as far as sense of community, walkability, and people enjoying the historic space, because I think that was right in one of your purposes of the protection district,
Right,
to
but the
foster wider
reuse-
public knowledge and appreciation of such neighborhoods and buildings. That's what we're trying to do, is increase the quality of life of the center of town, certainly not trying to detriment the quality of life in the center of town.
Right, but some of the walkability of the center of town was changed long ago. When 2A came right up through the center of Lunenburg, you lost the walkability of the center of town.
People walk around the center of town all the time. Where they're going,
Absolutely.
I don't know, but they're walking.
But it changed dramatically, right then and there. It changed from being able to have a ball game on the center.
So you don't want to walk in the center of town anymore?
No, I don't. I don't want to walk.
You don't want anyone to be able to walk in the
Well,
center of
I
town?
think a lot of people do. I mean, I see them walking in the center of town.
They walk for exercise purposes, but are they walking to go to some business purposes?
Well, there's not a lot of businesses right now for them to go to. I think
There have been businesses in the center of town, and they haven't made it.
that's true, and that's partly why the state guidelines for doing these type of things do encourage this type of mixed-use development, increases the density of the town center as well. So I think, everybody on this board here totally agrees with you regarding the importance of preservation and the importance of those specific buildings in terms of symbolizing and representing the town's heritage and, a lot of the town's history, the town's spirit. So I think we're all on board on that. And like Damon was just saying, I think the goal here really is to increase the economic viability of not just developing, but also maintaining these historic structures and taking advantage of an opportunity where we know people are proud of Lunenburg Town Center. We've gotten that message loud and clear. And the evidence also points to they'd like to be able to enjoy it even more. And so I think
You said evidence. What evidence? You had the
we had the charrette.
We had a
the
great
charrette, and the
turnout.
charrette did not come up with that conclusion, and there were.
I think you took something out of it that I didn't, because
Yeah,
I
the
saw a lot of
charrette
people who
was
were positive about
Very
this.
supportive of the village.
I was
district.
there.
I
I was there too, and a lot of it was about, I want the history and I want the people to,
Yeah.
this
Right, and
to
that's what
stay as it is.
we all want as well. We all want that same concept.
You know what I think? So, I mean, we could definitely talk about this more tonight. It sounds like if the historical commission so far has mostly reviewed what's in the ledger, I think we could have a lot more productive meeting if you had the opportunity to maybe review in detail the village district draft.
We did, at our meeting.
Oh, you did review it. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you said you heard about it from the newspaper. Okay, I gotcha. Okay, that's fine then. Then we should continue talking about it. Regarding just one thing about preservation, because I do think we are all on the same page about preserving. One thing that I'm a homeowner in the district, and I love historic homes. I think it's kind of, owning a historic home is kind of a labor of love. It takes a lot of money to keep a historic home operating and keep it preserved and really help continue to show its vibrancy. And I think what's exciting about adaptive reuse in the context of the district is that it's taking something valuable and historic and protecting it, and also helping make the protection really feasible. It's not one of those things that, oh, gee, I'd like to do it, but I can't afford it. By creating a context which can sort of sustain the serious cost it takes and the commitment it takes to actually preserve these structures. recently, the town was very fortunate to auction off the historic home in the center on its register. The story ended very well. A very committed family bought it. They did a really nice job renovating it. It's a really valuable addition to the center of town. That story, from what I read of it, could have come very close to not happening. I mean, the fact is, the price dropped to, like, I believe $10,000 to sell. I think that's a good representation of really, it gives you an idea of how, left to its own devices, the market by itself is not, a residential market. It's a challenge to preserve a historic home. It'll be a challenge to expect buyers to come in, pay prices that sellers are selling for, and rehabilitate these homes to the place we'd all like to see them at. I think you see a similar thing with, like, the primary school in other, the Brooks House. I think what Damon did here is a really wouldn't it be wonderful if the Brooks House could kind of evolve into something like this, with active businesses there, bringing in money and providing for its maintenance. Sadly, I've heard more talk about demolishing the Brooks House than I've heard about preserving it. I think the kind of things we're talking about with this Village Center bylaw, and critically, the Architectural Preservation District, are going to give me personally the most hope I've had of seeing, both the preservation of Lunenburg's historic heritage through an adaptive reuse, which even allows, I think, the town to really enjoy it even more. So I'll stop and get off the soapbox, but that's kind of my take on it.
Okay. All right, any other questions, any other feedback from the board on the updated draft?
I'd like to hit on Nathan's few points.
Go ahead.
So, number 8 on page 7, under the design standards. Eight B8, you raised the question, Nathan, about the impact of this on a home occupation.
Well, yeah, not so much a home occupation. I understand what more. Let's say it wasn't a home occupation. Let's say they were opening it up. They wanted to add to the residence, and they were going to have someone else come in. I understand there is home. Although, keep in mind, because we're making this its own district, I'm not sure where that home occupation stuff would.
Not mistaken, home occupation is a cross district.
Cross districts? Okay. Then maybe that's fine. I just wondered if maybe it was a little too prescriptive, especially for the case where you got a residential structure and you might build a secondary structure to address some of our mixed-use goals. I'm trying to imagine, like, you use myself as an example, use anybody on Main Street as an example. If they, probably, if they wanted to continue to occupy the house, but, add some value to the neighborhood through supporting a space for a business. Let's say I wanted to open a gym in my barn,
Antique store in your barn.
So yeah, I was gonna have that renovated. I mean, footprint-wise, I'm pretty confident my first floor
Yeah, then you
unit,
trip into the campus and, because, is your barn attached?
the bottom's attached,
Okay.
yeah.
It's attached to his.
Yeah. So it's just the 25%, it wouldn't work at all. I mean, it's probably still be 60% residence unless I deoccupied my first floor. I don't know. It's just,
I think, does that kind of go along with, we're not, clearly not going to make a single-story building, put on a second floor. If it's a residence, I mean, he already had his living space there, he's just reducing it. It's not like a new building, right? So,
Right, he's just taking his barn.
Maybe,
converting
maybe,
it to an antique store.
I'll have to think about it. I mean, I guess there could be a grandfathering clause
Yeah.
at the front end, as of 1 May 2015, buildings that are residential are exempt from this.
okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how the board wants to address it. It just,
his example, and in that example anyways, it seems like a grandfathering thing.
yeah, and I mean, I guess the other thing you could do is you could look at it as, My understanding is the zoning board and the zoning enforcement officer apply the special permit dimensional variation across anything that's dimensional. 25% becomes a dimensional. So there's a little bit of a check and balance there, where going through that process would, give you the ability to retain that and get the ability to add that business, and get around the 25%, but it's not just giving it away.
Yep. Yeah, I see what you're saying. But
It adds an extra layer, but it also adds an extra layer of protection as much as it adds an extra
Yep.
layer of...
So you're saying an existing case might be covered by a grandfathering clause, and for additional new cases, they might be able to apply for a dimensional variation?
Well, an existing case, if you had an antique store in your barn right now,
No.
well, but if you did,
Okay, yeah.
and that was 40% and you were 60% residential,
Yeah.
your grandfather. We can't retroactively
Yes.
apply this to you. What I'm saying is, going forward, if you wanted to do that, because you're an existing building, because it's a dimension, you could theoretically apply for the dimensional variation special permit and go forward that way. I don't know that, under the, using the basis that you are an existing residence and you're looking to apply the new bylaw as much as possible going forward, but without causing a detrimental impact to the neighborhood or your property or yada yada.
Yeah, I wonder too, just the architectural nature of the existing structures to some extent, like it's going to be a little tougher to do the split bottom. I mean, not impossible. I'm sure it's doable, but you're not going to have a heavily insulated first floor ceilings and that sort of thing. So it might not be something to think about. I would say. The only other thing about the 25% is, to Damien's point earlier, and maybe you have an opinion on this, like the extent that we wanted in some cases to support accessible, like handicap accessible, residences in the mix. If someone was doing something where they were pushing some of the business stuff up to the second floor, but wanted to, put some accessible units on the first floor, maybe that's, that would be a case where the 25 might
I
get
assume
in
if they're
the
going
way.
to push the business upstairs, they're going to need an elevator anyway, so they're going to, it's kind of one of those...
Wash, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, that sounds like that's fine then. That was that.
Well, I guess I'm confused because now in existing homes that are already in the district, I would assume if I'm a massage therapist, I need a one-room that holds a bed. There's Be Waxed in Leominster. It's a 12 by 12 room with one table, and you go in, you get your eyebrows done and whatever else you want, and you're on your way. It's a one bed. Are you saying that I would not be able to convert one of my former living room?
No,
into that
no,
now?
that's not what I'm saying. I guess,
Okay.
no, not at all. I guess what I'm saying is I'm wondering if we have this kind of prescriptive 25% maximum for first floor residential space.
In mixed use.
In mixed use, yeah. It's not at the end of the world. It's just like, I'm trying to think of like some of the big colonials in the district, right? Let's say you wanted to continue to occupy it and
Right.
add a larger business. 12 by 12, no, that's going to work fine. You could either provide the room in the house, you could add an ancillary structure. Long story short, though,
Let's say if you put a barn, something that looked like a barn in your yard and ran your business out of that, it's kind of...
well, actually, I'm sorry, I take that back. So if you put the 12 foot on the first floor, that would be, it would be totally dwarfed by the residential space. So that's the kind of scenario where I would say maybe if we can grandfather out existing
Right, 'cause that's what I was
Well, and
thinking,
that's what I mean,
if there was-
if we want to put a clause in there for existing residential uses
I think
as of
so.
this date that are adding commercial space are exempt from the 25%.
In my opinion,
requirement.
that would make sense because it would allow for the more rapid proliferation of businesses into the district in a way that was harmonious with the current rest. Here's a case where we're talking about people who want to still occupy their house,
Sure.
also want to take advantage of some of the opportunities to provide
Yeah.
something to the town, and
And I think it would be actually create a great business incubator kind of environment because it'll bridge the gap between home occupation, which has limits on the number of people you can employ, and the trips to your house. So it can help bridge the gap between what's allowed by right everywhere and what's actually a real commercial space. Because a lot of people don't need a real commercial space, can't afford it. But certainly working out of the home is a great option, but can be limited sometimes by our current zoning.
Yeah, so we're just going to exempt all buildings that are currently residential as of,
Why don't we just say for new construction?
I was just gonna ask that
Yeah.
same question. Last time we had this discussion, we qualified it by adding newly constructed in front of this, the regulation.
mhm.
And if we're really concerned about new constructed mixed uses not having the 25% floor space for residential, then maybe.
Well, I guess then if we look at patios,
Yep.
that could be wholly occupied residentially.
By a special permit?
No, patios would have no more than 25%. Oh, I see what you're saying.
It would be all multifamily.
Because and again, I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, but, we've had a lot of talk about if we do this, what is the scenario? We've talked about bringing life back and maybe having 50,000 square feet of residential use downtown is sort of what will do that.
So maybe what we want is, with the exception of existing residential buildings.
Okay, yeah, existing residential buildings or uses?
Homes.
Now, I would phrase it as use, because you could look at a building and say that's a residential building, but it could be occupied commercially.
Okay,
That's why I would say use, so it's actively being used as a
valid
residence.
point.
As of the whatever date.
As of the 1st of May,
Okay.
or as of the town meeting, whatever.
May 2nd.
Yeah, I mean, they're kind of the same date.
Right, because I don't want any house that's existing in our bylaw, in our village district, to not be able to have that one-room CPA, as I said, esthetician, massage, hair salon, it's the mom that stays home and just does hair, during
I
the
mean,
day.
maybe it's even grander than that. Maybe it's
A cigar.
we figured out a way that we can divide the front entrance and, we can keep our parlor half of the building and kitchen, and we've got this formal dining room and this other parlor that we don't use, and gee, wouldn't that be great for whatever it might be? Yeah, and we're comfortable doing that.
Can I ask a silly tactical question?
There's no silly questions.
So in the email that you sent out, it went out, the document says draft 7, 13th of January, but it's labeled draft 8. But this version
That's
that's in
because,
the package is a different date and not a different draft number. But they seem similar, but I reviewed in detail this one, but I haven't reviewed in detail this one. Are they identical?
They should
Is
be.
this identical to the one you sent out?
I believe so. I think Marjorie changed the date at the top. I forgot that there was a header with the date, and I went in and did the text, and
Okay, because they all 3 copies say draft 7, so I wasn't sure.
yeah, like I said, I
draft
forget
7
about the
was.
header. I do my labeling in the name of the file.
Oh, okay.
That's how I track, and so I was working off the document that existed and missed that minor detail.
If I may, just one, about this, so let's say, we talked about the patios, let's say the primary building came online, and that would be the same deal. That would, had been a lot of talk about that being 100%, residential.
My understanding was that ship has sailed in a
Okay,
fairly major way, that there's, there may be vestiges of it kicking around, but
okay, got
the
it,
reality of that happening is fairly low.
got it.
And I may be ill-informed, but that's my understanding of
No,
it.
okay, so but according to this, then, if that would have come online, well, okay, here's the other thing, though. We have, in the special permit, we have an apartment complex use. So if apartment, okay, so this is.
This is for mixed-use buildings only.
Awesome, okay, great, so questions answered, all good, for me.
And then,
What's the next?
well, actually, I guess the same section, you had questions on number 11 about design guidelines and APD. I thought a lot about this, and, I know we talked a lot about it the last time. I think we've sort of committed to the guidelines that are in here. The APD is going to drop a much more specific and much more pointed on building design and not necessarily on and I'm not saying that they won't address site design and the way that it addresses the existing buildings and all that, because that's all part of it.
Yep.
But my understanding is their design guidelines would focus on the building detail.
Yep.
So since properties are going to have to go through that anyway, rather than deferring everything off to the APD that is yet to be determined, the board has decided that these are important factors in their review of the building.
Yep.
And then, again, we're getting into detail issues that I think the APD is going to mirror a lot of the generalities that are in this bylaw with more specificity.
Okay.
So, you talk about,
So, I totally agree with that. The only one that I thought might not be applicable would be number 2, where we're trying to cover what the finished material is. I would think that the architectural preservation is going to want to cover what the finished material is.
well, and I guess
The rest
that's
of them seem like
more sitey kind of stuff.
and more about mixed use or retail usage and stuff like that. Like, if the building has a flat roof, you have to give it a facade. That's not something that I wouldn't think the architecture preservation.
They might get into it because it might affect the integration with the adjoining buildings.
My concern here is having requirements in 2 areas that could potentially conflict with each other. And that, if there's an overlap, we should remove the overlap. If there's not an overlap, we should leave it.
Sure.
That's my input. If they're gonna dictate the building facade, we shouldn't dictate the building
Sure.
facade. We should refer to theirs. If they're gonna dictate the finished material, we shouldn't dictate the finished material. We should defer to theirs. Because if we have it in both places, someone's gonna come before us and say, well, they say it's gotta be pine clapboards, and you guys say it could be vinyl, so which is it?
Well, and that's kind of where I was going with number 2 is, I was flipping back to figure out which one it was, and it's a fairly general statement. It says, building finished material shall be appropriate to traditional New England architecture and may include but should not be limited to brick, high-quality brick face, wood, stone, or high-quality stone face. So if we take out the "and may include," I think that they're going to, we're stating the intent within the district for that facade look, and the APD would cover, like you said, the materials and those kind of bits and bobs. Or are you looking to strike 2 entirely?
Yeah, I'm just concerned having the information in 2 places where it could potentially conflict,
Well, and-
especially as things evolve.
And I guess that's why I was looking at taking out "and the may include," because then we remove material and we're talking stylistically, and, traditional New England architecture is essentially what the preservation district consists of. So we're just stating that we'd like the consistency. And I think that going forward, for special permit purposes, having that statement in there gives you a little bit of additional credence in, pushing forward or pulling back on someone's proposal if it clearly isn't going to fit into that.
But if it doesn't fit traditional New England architecture.
It's not going to get through the APD.
It's not gonna, right.
And I understand, it's more arrows in the
So
quiver.
you're saying that it would be helpful if our requirements were kind of like a soft introduction to?
Yeah, that's kind of what it's, have it mentioned here, because they technically are 2 standalone documents, and for some of the special permit language, they're going to look for something in the guideline for decisions to be keyed off of, and it's not quite as strong to say, oh yeah, but it's also for that over there. It's nice to at least have that little touch point here to sort of bridge the 2.
Hearing what you're saying, basically, if I wanted to see how these 2 things were going to work together, when it came to any building that started to become, that was zoned, we're going to be, the Architectural Preservation District is going to look at facades. And so it's going to look at how does it look from the streetscape, and how is that going to change? And that's where they're going to really fight. Anything that changes the outside appearances, how that an existing structure is going to be. Any new structure that's going to come in there has got to be compatible with what's going on. So there's going to be design standards for sure. They're basically saying that anything that happens to an existing building and anything happening to a compatible building that wants to go into that area is going to go through architectural preservation review. So it is going to be looked at, and it's going to go under this guidelines that come out of this. It's going to come out of the review standards of the Architectural Preservation District.
So I think that's compatible with what you're requesting, Ken. I think it's also compatible with what Adam's just suggesting, that we kind of have a little brief mention here, one sentence that kind of...
Right, so if you get into a lot of specifics about what it is that you're looking for, they're going...
could potentially
It's gonna
conflict. Yeah, and
because
that's-
they're gonna say, wait a minute, I got everything the planning board wanted, but no, now you gotta come through review, and it's like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, and I can say that that does happen. I'm working
Oh,
on
yeah,
a project
yeah.
now where the mayor had to step in and get the historic people and the planning board together to get on the same page, because both wanted completely different things.
So, Adam, in addition to the like kind of reference to just the theme there that gives us the, you know, the touch point for the special permit reasoning, should we explicitly mention in the design criteria, is it to say that, you know, it's expected that it will, whatever, it will be reviewed by the AP, according to the APD?
All
or
buildings within the Village Center District shall be subject to the requirements of the Architectural Preservation District.
Oh,
Number
there it
11.
is, number 11, wow, duh, thanks.
So, you know, and again, if we take out the "and may include," we eliminate, I think, conflict with whatever materials the APD draws up.
Yeah, unless they go for an Asian theme or some, I don't know, like...
You never know. Pagodas might look nice with the colonial architecture. But, you know, and then as we go along, it's more of a general guideline that, you know, might be worth discussing. Stuff like, you know, vertical articulation, or, you know, I think something like a new retail building shall have one of the following features along the front entrances to pedestrians: awning, marquee, arcade, or colonnade. I think that gives them enough latitude to design something that will fit into different situations that will be within the APD. I don't know if, you know, that sounds...
One of the things that comes up in this document is the fact of the matter that they suggest people come in for a voluntary review ahead of time, so that they even know what it is that the architectural preservation people are going to be looking at, so that they don't go through an expensive design and then suddenly get it all shot down.
Right, that's actually what I was just gonna say, is if you actually read the requirements that are in this, they aren't really requirements, they're not hard and
Well-
requirements that you could reference. They kind of say, we care about these kinds of things, but you don't exactly say what they gotta be.
But it also...
It doesn't have any level of detail, even to the level that we have today. Let's take building finish material, talking about brick, high-quality brick face, wood, stone, high-quality stone face. That level of detail is not in this document.
The reason why is that giving you a nutshell of what this thing basically does, is that if this thing passed, what happens then is that there will be a commission that will be appointed by the selectmen. It is a 5-person commission. It's going to have 2 people that are residents in this area that are going to be on this board. There'll be 1 that'll be from the Historical Commission. There'll be 1 that should be somewhere in the building trades and stuff. And I think that leaves 1 more that is also artist, you know, design expert, that sort of person. Those people will then come up with standards. Those standards, everything that they come up with, is then going to go back to town meeting.
No.
Okay? That's how this thing is written.
Did you change that?
That's how it's written.
The previous draft, unless you've changed it, said, in adopting design guidelines and rules and regulations,
It says here, shall be appointed.
included, the APDC shall first hold a duly advertised at least 14 days in advance with newspaper circulation.
Right, but that's about when they actually have the standards in place. Before all of those standards, all the design standards and everything else, those have to come out of this commission, and then that commission will then bring that forth to the town meeting, and the town meeting will go ahead and decide that is what they want.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay.
I support Becky on that one.
That's what they want. It isn't going to be, here's this little group of people that have willy-nilly decided how they want to have things to be, and it is not going to be the will of the people. It will be, this is what we want, this is what it's going, this is what we're bringing forth to the town meeting, and the town meeting will then decide, yes, these things are things that we can live with. This is what we want this architectural preservation district to have the design.
I'm all for that, but I don't.
If they say no, what happens?
Then they have to go back and work on it.
And so in that meantime, while you're working on all of that, and as these new come in, what criteria do they follow?
Well, I would think that in the same...
Because that, you're talking town meetings are once a year, so if they voted no...
Well, you could have a special town meeting, if this got in May, you could have a special town meeting come September, so that would give them 3 months to come up with the design standards. I would hope that they, in that, would have a great deal of public input, so that they didn't go there for just a,
Well, I don't know that we incur $7,000 to have a special town meeting for that item, but anyway, so what would
there's
be
usually
going...
something else that's coming along
What
at
would
the
be
same...
going on?
Right.
What bylaws would they be following? What design standards would they, because we have design standards as a planning board, and as Ken said, we were very descriptive on the design. Oh, do you have a...
I don't see where it says that it has to go to town meeting.
What I
doesn't.
recall from the, I'm sorry, what I recall was that board would hold a public hearing.
Yeah, it's the same as if the planning board
that's
would
not a
adopt
town-
rules and regulations. It's a
That's not-
14-day notice public hearing.
No.
It's not a town meeting.
Standards.
Which section is this?
I don't remember, but I remember reading it. I remember thinking it was interesting that they were going to hold a public hearing.
It says here, Section 3, the APD shall by town meeting vote encompass the area that is going to be the Lunenburg. We have actually made this bigger, so this architectural preservation district is the historic district, so it'll be greater.
That's amendments to the district boundaries only.
What?
That's only the district.
Okay, it is, but there is, it also goes, whatchamacallit, my understanding is that this also includes the design standard.
That's only for district boundaries. Under Section 5, the APDC may also promulgate rules and regulations consistent with the provisions of this bylaw, or set forth such forms and procedures as it deems appropriate for the regulation of its affairs and the conduct of its business, including requirements for the contents and form of applications for certificates, hearing procedures, and other matters, in adopting design guidelines and rules and regulations, including any subsequent amendments.
So
The
it-
APDC shall first hold a duly posted public hearing advertised at least 14 days in advance within a newspaper of local circulation.
Right, I see that, that's Section 5. So it is true that what you're saying, I am probably mistaken. And that is
Paula,
that...
did you...
No, just the last paragraph states that if they have to submit the rules and regulations in 35 days after the agency has provided copies of the there's no requirement.
Okay, so no, it isn't. It will, so those things would come.
So it just has to go to Board of Selectmen?
Remember on that.
Well, the board, it doesn't even say the board of selectmen has to
So
approve
that
it.
we're not having different design bylaws.
Just says the board of selectmen has to know about it. Right, so if this gets voted in, this board that gets appointed can come up with whatever requirements they want.
As it's
Well,
written
and that's- I'm
now.
having a sidebar conversation with that, and I apologize. Who set up this criteria?
Who set up this criteria?
Yeah, this packet here.
This comes out of a district bylaw that came out of the town of Ipswich.
Ipswich, okay. Because I would ask that a planning board member, one of the planning board members sit on that board as well, because we want to try to make, we have design standards, and we also now have a village district that we're going to do, and we're having standards there, and we want them cohesive. We don't want to be fighting, that's why we brought you
Right.
guys in and said, we want to do this to our village, but we want to keep the historic, let's partner with you and make sure we're both meeting our goals of our charters, but I want to do that with the design bylaw too, because we can't have people coming in front of us saying, we want to do this and create this and build this, and then say, well, okay, we can do all of this, but then you got to go to a different group for design. So I just would like a planning board member to be able to sit on that committee as well, to make sure that we're following and are in the same group within those design, because we spent almost 2 years on design bylaw to make sure that if you have your air conditioning units up top, that there's a, facade so nobody sees them. So we were critical to make sure in every building, you look at the mobile station over at Target, we make sure to try to keep it in that community country feel, not your modern.
So so essentially, I mean, all things are a work in progress.
Yes.
This,
I'm still a working progress.
what-
I'm still a working progress.
I know. We could actually have that as one of the people would be from the planning board.
That would be my
and stuff.
request on that committee, is one of my members here would, notice I say one of my members here.
There also has to be some kind of checks and balances for whatever requirements that they're able to pass.
Exactly.
Not just participation of a member. There's got to either be some approval body or some checks and balances in place.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's why I agreed with Becky
I
that,
agree with what she was saying.
what she was
before.
saying, I mean, I understand the process of how it gets there is iffy, but I think that whether it goes to town meeting or whether at least goes to the selectmen or whoever to
Well,
review it,
it's the same procedure that this body uses to adopt your subdivision rules and regulations. So, I mean, there's precedent within state law for committees adopting regulations through singular public hearing.
Yep.
And I think that that public hearing is kind of the opportunity for input in theory and in hope there would be more discussion about it. I think that a lot of times this is done to allow for alterations that need to be done over periods of time. So you're not doing what Joanna was suggesting and waiting 12 months for town meeting to be able to amend it. If that's going to be the case, then you would just go and amend the APD itself and include the regulations right in there. Especially things like meeting procedures, application forms, things like that. Sometimes those need to change on a timeline that's quicker.
yeah,
I think that, the review by the selectmen is helpful because it gets someone else looking at them. And I guess I understand wanting someone from the planning board on this commission. I think that you also have to be cognizant that this could turn into a significant time commitment in the same vein as the planning board, and finding somebody willing to operate in both arenas may be more difficult than, we realize at this time.
I have a simplest question first. In your draft, there's certain text that's highlighted in yellow. Am I to understand that is language that's been struck from the draft?
In which draft? In the Architectural Preservation District draft or the Village draft?
The Village District.
Those are items that the board had reserved as, they were still in flux as to whether or not they were going to be included in the manner that they're shown.
So at the public hearing, we want to see what the public feels about those, and then hear their feedback, and then kind of make that recommendation. We want to hear how the public feels, and not just sit here and say,
One of the things that's on here is single-family homes. I'm sorry, I don't understand the bylaw very well, but the use provisions list all these uses and then design requirements, and they're describing a pattern of dense development, something that's fairly urban, things with, I think it says something about, 15-foot setback from the street, so how buildings close to the street. And so I'm having a lot of trouble envisioning how current uses would conform with the dimensional requirements and design guidelines set forth in this document. Like, I'm having trouble envisioning how the houses as they're used right now as single-family homes, like how would they come into conformity, because the design requirements here and the dimensional requirements are quite different from what you see in the town center right now.
The dimensional requirements are minimum standards, so you can't be closer than 15 feet. You could be 100 feet back and be in conformance. So that's, when you read a bylaw like this, the dimensional side setback, front setback is the minimum that they can be.
Okay. And so under dimensional requirements A, it says maximum front setback without
Yeah, it's supposed to
street.
be close to the road.
Yes, and that's for new construction.
For new construction, okay.
Existing structures, in Massachusetts with zoning, if you have an existing structure and/or use, and the zoning, either the district or the requirements change, that existing structure and use get frozen, for lack of a better term, and they become a pre-existing non-conforming use.
Right, okay.
And they, in perpetuity, as long as that use continues, unbroken, for a period less than 2 years, it's legal forever and ever.
Right.
So if there's a single-family home that's set back 40 feet and, is gonna be a single-family home and it just keeps being a single-family home, it's constantly a legal use. These apply to uses going forward. So new construction, if there's a building that's abandoned, which means a use ceases for a period of 2 years or greater, then it becomes an abandoned use and it's subject to the requirements outlined in here. Now, structures continue to be grandfathered for their life. And there's some nuance to when you change property or that kind of stuff that might take away grandfathering, but in general, a house that's set back more than the 15 feet isn't, we're not gonna say, all right, you gotta pick that house up and move it closer. It changes the character of that house, it's not necessarily financially feasible and doesn't make a lot of sense. This would be for, again, people looking to do new construction on lots that don't have that.
And as of right now, a lot of the properties in the center of town are existing non-conforming because they're on half-acre lots, quarter-acre lots with small setbacks, and they don't conform to the Residence A, which is zoned now because it was zoned Residence A after they existed. So it's actually bringing a lot of the non-conforming houses back into conformance by passing this.
Also, a lot of the requirements, as you read them, they pertain to new construction of larger parcels that might develop a small campus, where you'd want that real easy walkability. If you look at the lots that we have, they're just about all already populated with houses that are in the historic district that you don't want to allow to be demolished. So it's not like someone's gonna come clear cut all the houses and then rebuild everything right on the sidewalk.
Right. So I think we're in agreement with that we wouldn't want to see this a building come into nonconformity and therefore have to be demolished and rebuilt according to these
Yeah,
standards.
that's certainly not the case.
That doesn't happen, and the law prevents that from being able to happen.
And that was one of the main reasons we left the special, we were entertaining leaving the single family there by special permit, is we were really concerned about leaving it there because we don't want a developer to come and take advantage of all these nice tight dimensional offsets and build a really tight spread of housing development, non-mixed use. But by the same token, we wanted maximum protection for the existing uses. So we could probably leave it in or take out the single family by special permit. If we leave it in, we have the special permit approval criteria, which would support our rejection of claims that were not in harmony with the goals of the village district bylaw and would support existing homeowners, for example.
Okay.
Well, and did the state bylaw recommend that within the village district, we do not, any land that is buildable, you can't build a single-family house?
Recommendation is to have it as prohibited.
Right, is to prohibit any single-family homes. So if someone was to buy, 3 lots, we wouldn't let them build single-family homes.
Right.
Because you want to create density and not continue single-family homes.
Right. That's understood. It just seems to me that right now the architectural preservation district bylaw is dealing with two issues. One, how new development is going to look, and secondly, how do we preserve old homes? And I think it came up at the last meeting that maybe those are two different issues, and they need to be dealt with somewhat separately. That new development would really be something a little bit different and treated differently than, say, renovation or a new use of an old building.
This is a perfect segue for a comment that I wanted to have tonight. Was on the APD, actually. Was thinking that we actually do separate it into two different things: alteration and reuse of existing versus new construction. I can see that, like just by the words, architectural preservation, you're trying to preserve the architecture. And I suppose you could interpret that as architectural preservation of a neighborhood, but more specifically, to allow the APD to permit the alteration or reuse of existing homes, while the planning board took care of the new construction. And we also had talked about before the desire to streamline applications and to not make applicants for new construction to bounce from board to board and meeting to meeting. That would allow for that as well.
Yeah, and I guess,
Thank you.
so you're saying new construction not go to APD?
Well, I was thinking that we've already got a good visual and good feeling town center construction to this bylaw, and to go ahead and allow for further scrutiny by the APD for the reuse of an existing structure.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't know how many new buildings there are going to be in this district to begin with, but I kind of feel that a new building would be more just send them through us rather than bounce from group to group. But again, like I said, there's not a whole lot of free land for flat-out new buildings.
Yeah,
And if they're going to knock down an old building to put the new one up,
they
they're
have to
still
go
going to
there
do it.
anyway. Yeah, and I look at it in two ways. I agree, streamlining it and having them come just to the planning board is attractive to somebody who wants to build, because it's without the need for a special permit for use, it's a one-stop shop. The two different reviews focus on things that are so different that they could be done concurrently and not have an impact on timing. Because if you're laying out a building footprint for the purposes of this board, even if your building is more nuanced than a square, if you identify the square that you're going to build it within, this board can kind of look at it as everything that goes on around it. And the APD can look at the detail of the facade of the building and how it matches up. I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other. Again, the one-stop shopping is attractive because it's streamlined, it's quick. Someone comes in, they do it all in one place, and they are done. And again, I don't know how many new buildings we'll have. I think that a lot of the places where new buildings are going to occur are going to be sort of on the fringes, because it would be some of the properties along 2A. Clearly we don't know what's going to happen with Passios, but that's, I think, the other big opportunity for a new building. Or buildings. Again, I think that I could support either. I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other.
I mean, we could even require site plan review by planning board for the reuse, right? Would that be appropriate?
Oh, I think we would have to.
And then agriculture preservation would
yeah.
become the permit granting authority for the reuse? Or is that not what you were thinking?
Well, I figured, I mean, they're looking at the building alteration only. So they're still going to be installing parking. I think ultimately I would like to see a significant overhaul of the site plan review bylaw that, and I think that the reuse of these buildings would most likely trigger a site plan requirement, whether through stormwater or
Well, just to provide the parking.
yeah,
to do
that's
something.
yeah. There's going to be something that's going to kick them to this board. So I think even reuse is going to be operating in two spheres, which is why I see a new building operating that same way within the village.
Unless they get deeded parking off-site.
But even then, I think you're going to have a hard time finding anybody who's going to deed all of their parking off-site.
There's not a lot of it. Do we have something in our bylaws that after the addition of 5 parking spaces, they come to us? I know other
think it's-
towns do, I don't know if we do.
Yeah, we have, I'll say, some odd applicability requirements. Retail, commercial. I mean, it doesn't speak specifically to the village because, but if we look at the commercial district, any retail commercial is anything encompassing 500 square feet of gross floor area for new construction, or 1,000 square feet of gross floor area for reuse, or 3 or more parking spaces.
No.
In commercial or industrial, it's 6 or more parking spaces. So, that, if we looked at those, it would essentially grab all of that.
Okay.
So I definitely want to get on to the APD. Do we want to wrap up the VCD stuff?
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
do you want to
that's
ask, make sure the Historic
you
Commission
guys.
doesn't have any specific questions on the Village District before we move on to the architectural protection?
Yeah, I think
Well, I thought
I still got a few more questions that we got to wrap up here as well.
Okay.
We're almost done, don't worry, it's not one.
Kind of been working on both at the same time here, but
Yeah,
I just want to make sure there weren't any specific questions, we weren't leaving them out.
Oh, no, I won't go on. I'm still on the village.
Okay.
so I think we were,
On page 5.
We're on page 9 at this point. Because I think the page 5, we
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of wrapped into what we just talked about.
Yep.
Okay.
So we're on page 9,
60/40 stuff. yeah.
A1BI.
Yep, so I guess I'm cool with 40. I wasn't sure what in our conversation before, if we were saying even 40 seemed high, or what's your take on that? I mean, where the conversation landed last time, was 40 an acceptable minimum for that?
I could see why you would want less than 40 in some situations. But again, this is for a campus development, so,
So it might.
yeah, since we're not, in this one right here, we're really not talking about a reuse of a historic home or
Yeah,
something like
we're-
that. This is a new build on a campus development. So like the Passios or the primary school or something of that nature, I think 40 to 60 is, 60 is tough to accomplish unless you get a big Florida.
Right, but I mean, if you have a retail use or some sort of restaurant, I guess I don't want to limit it so someone can't do it,
Yes, yeah.
but also saying that that's kind of the top of what would be allowed.
Because the reason for having the minimums, maximums, whatever, is to make sure that it still feels open, inviting, not closed off or anything like that, and again, fostering the community use of the space.
So just to help us visualize the numbers here, is this about, like, the front and side, the front here, is this about 40 to 50?
You said it was 47, I think.
Yeah, in that little packet that I did with the Brooks House, if you flip to page R3,
45.
there's a note that says that the front had 45% shown and the side had
Is that just the first floor?
47. Yeah, so that's percentage of the first floor.
And that's pretty heavy glazing, I mean,
Yeah, you'd see 60 if it had, I mean, it's kind of reduced because I infilled the porch massing there. If you had the whole first floor, floor to floor, occupied with glass, then you could hit the 60 pretty easily.
Yeah, my question is, I mean, this at 40 to 47 is pretty nice. Would 30 still be acceptable? Like if you had more of a pattern
I
like
mean-
that down here, you'd be looking at like closer to 30-ish probably.
Yeah. You could probably do 30, and
I'm open to whatever you guys want.
What is the Brooks house today?
I didn't do,
Oh, it's probably
Existing.
20 to 25.
yeah, it's pretty low, I'd say. Which is not bad, but as far as this, I don't see anyone wanting to move in there as far as a commercial use or whatever.
With that
With that glazing.
I hear you.
Let me ask the question that.
And again, this is the caveat of a new campus style. We're not talking about the fit out of an old home on this one.
Glazing its windows
Yes.
for the audience.
Glazing his windows, yes.
So.
And
if-
donuts.
If the APD has ruling over this as well, even though it's a campus development, because it's in the historic district, what are their feelings on the glazing requirements? I mean, we're looking 35 to 40 to 60%, and a traditional house in the historic district is probably sub 20.
Yeah, but these aren't residential houses.
No, they're not, but they're still going to be subjected to the APD because they're in the district. So what happens there? Again, in the
But
interest of not having a conflict.
Sure, I guess if you look at the Brooks house, though, those windows are smaller. If you look at maybe some of the other colonial houses that are around, maybe not right in the district, there's some that have much larger windows than what the Brooks house has. So I guess what I'm saying is if stylistically, if we're not looking at proportions, we're looking at aesthetics, you may be able to accomplish the look and reach 40 without compromising the historic nature or historic
So that's what, I
styling.
guess that's what I'm asking,
Yeah.
is if we say it's 40, which is aligned with something like this, and campus development,
Mm-hmm.
is the APD going to say, no, that doesn't
Yeah.
comply with our...
What it says here is that the shape of the roof, the windows, the doors, and other design elements should be compatible with the architectural style and characteristics of the building. So it doesn't get into specifics as to how much, but that it has that anti-colonial look, that it's symmetrical because that's how that particular house is designed, so it wouldn't be like you had, 5 windows on one side and then 3 on the other or something of that nature. It would be balanced. It's that kind of architecture. That would be the thing that they would be looking at.
All right, so something like this would certainly qualify then as meeting and looking traditional to the historical era.
Yeah.
All right, so we don't have to worry about a conflict if we go with 40. I'd even be okay if you want to drop it to 35, if that would make you feel more comfortable. But 40 seemed like a good number to me, because this was 45 and 47. So these are already at least 5% higher than what the regulation calls for.
Yeah, 30, 35, is either one fine with me.
And I have a comment also. The last meeting, there was a person who spoke about the Citizens Bank in Groton, and they had to go through a bunch of hoops to make it look like a single-family house. All they did was build a curtain wall that looked like a single-family house, and they've got their ATM facing the road, so it looks like somebody had their 70-inch widescreen TV at their front door, facing the house, facing out. So, in all honesty, you can make it look as whatever we want to, but there's always going to be that business feel to it, potentially. So maybe the less glazing requirement, the better, because if it was an ATM, it could light up the whole street at night. Just
Wow.
food for thought.
The ATM is a special permit, right? You said that,
Okay, sure.
or the drive-up ATM, I thought it was anyway.
Is it a
drive-up window is.
The drive-up with special permit.
It's a special permit, not ATM specifically,
Wow.
but that falls up to a drive-through, so that would fall into the drive-through.
A walk-up.
I would hope the Architectural Protection
It's a
District doesn't
walk-up
allow the
ATM.
screen in
behind-
front of the
No,
building.
it's a walk-up ATM.
Behind the first,
All right.
building facade.
Okay, so where do we want to, thanks for, your graphics really help, I think, explain the numbers. I'm okay anywhere in the 30 to 40 range. It's,
So why don't we split the difference and go with 35? that
If
okay?
everybody's on board, I'm on board.
I would like to make one more comment on that building section. There is a potential, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but for somebody to have an existing home with a larger parcel and decide to include that single-family home with additional new buildings and qualify for this campus development? If that was the case, would they be restricted to 10% of living space on the existing single-family home? It's in BI.
Yeah, that kind of gets into a similar question I had.
Back to the grandfather thing, right?
Should be new buildings?
I think you just add new construction.
Yeah, new buildings.
I think it needs to be there, though.
Yeah, and the other question is like,
So if you turn family property.
when we get into the campus there, I think it's great that you got the no more than 60% shall be occupied by residents. And at that point, like, isn't it, do we really need to be prescriptive about what floor it's on?
No, I mean, we can take I out if you want.
I think it'll probably be in the developer's interest, to put it the floor at that point, to attract, and if it
Yeah, I
isn't-
mean, the commercial wants to be on the first floor for the most part. So if you want me to take I out, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how others feel.
For new construction, it might be important. I mean, part of the attraction of a campus development is
Mixed use.
a mixed use.
Right, but so understand real clearly, there's two clauses. One is 10% on the first, 10%, no more than 10% residential on the first floor. And that's the clause we're proposing to strike. The second clause still requires that at least 40% of the whole,
Building B.
Oh, I like the contrast between the two. It gives you kind of a min and a max.
Yeah, I like both. For new buildings, anyway.
Yeah, for new buildings.
okay.
I wouldn't want to strike it altogether. I'd just add the same caveat for new buildings.
So no more than 10% of the first floor
Of newly
of newly constructed
Yes. Yeah.
buildings.
So just, I don't mean to be a total pain in the rear. One thing to think about, in the other section, we have 25%. In the non-campus, I understand this is the campus. The one thing I think about, back to Groton, I think they have there's a large condo. I haven't spent a lot of time in there, but you come off, it's in an old mill building. When you come down the road from Lunenburg. Yes.
Okay.
And what's interesting is they do have a mixture, it's a little bit more heavy residential, but they do have a significant component of retail, commercial type stuff in there as well. The reason why I think we might want to bump it out to 25, and I support the spirit of what you guys are saying, is in a setting like that, a lot of that is senior living, and
I was gonna say, isn't that senior
I
living?
thought it was a retirement home.
Senior living.
Yeah, I thought the whole thing was
Yeah.
senior.
I don't know what the point is. If you're when you're integrating that senior living component, my guess would be that being able to have some, ground floor living space is probably useful for something like that. And I think that's something that would work with the village district, especially when contained, so that, it's no more than, the whole thing's going to be at least 40% mixed use, which is pretty awesome. But, that's kind of one of the reasons why I don't know if we want to be that tight on the first floor usage. So maybe, 20, whatever you guys think. I'm flexible, but I think 10's kind of low. Bump it up to 25 might have some value.
Yeah, but it's such a low number, even 25 and 10 is just a low number, so I'd be fine either way. And I think it meets what we're trying to get at.
Okay.
What do you guys think?
I'm trying to think of a scenario where you'd have 25% of the first floor residential, but 60% total not residential.
Just did one.
Did you?
What do you mean?
Yeah, so
You mean
the-
60% residential and 25% of the first floor being residential?
Yeah.
So, yeah, you mean it's 40% is the minimum commercial. So they could have,
So 50% is the second floor, okay?
Of
And
a
the
two-story.
maximum is 60%.
Of a
there can be
two-
3 floors.
Yep.
We're talking about a whole development,
as-
too.
As long as it's under the foot restriction.
Yeah.
So you can't see it on TV, but...
We can hold it up.
That's fourth floor.
It might be a little.
Yeah, this
zoom
is
in.
bigger than what we were talking about here, but had commercial on the first floor, parking underneath on the back, but what they had on the first floor was
I can't see.
an assembly use. They had a community room on the first floor. As an architect, I'd say that's not part of the residential use, it's assembly use.
That
But
looks
it's
like,
still serving the residents.
it looks like Whalen Park.
Not quite. Salem, but, yeah. Anyway,
But still, there's no residential on the first floor there.
yeah, but like you're saying, it kind of, you have to get in the building, so you could attribute some of that to being residential. You're probably not going to get a unit on the first floor in the 10% or 25%. But, and there's enough square footage to make it feasible to get up to the second floor, third, yeah.
All right. And if you feel strongly about it, we can change from 10 to 25.
My only, Adam, if we want to promote senior living, do you think that's going to be an issue?
Again, I don't have I was kind of going back to what had been in previous drafts.
Gotcha.
So it's what you guys had talked about for a long time prior to us really starting to pare it down. So if we want to keep it at 25 to be consistent, that's fine.
So if TC Passio decides we get an RFP, we're gonna make it a senior center. Are you saying that there has to be some business on there as well?
Well, senior, if it's different between like senior housing and senior, like I think a facility, like
Yeah, facility wouldn't be
wouldn't be a residential use, that's like
unless they were living there.
Yeah, that could actually be a business.
No,
right?
I mean a residential senior center.
like Sunrise in Leominster or something like that, like an old age home where you go and you move in.
Well, not even that. My husband's mother lives in Townsend in a beautiful senior development over 55. It's her own apartment. It's not a senior housing. It's,
Yeah, I think they talked about,
That would fall, I think, under or apartment complex.
Yeah.
okay,
Special
yeah, you would get a
permit.
special permit. Okay, so you know what, forget, I think, I'm fine with 10 or 25%, because they could probably exempt the apartment. If you dropped an apartment in here, would that not have to meet that?
That's correct.
Dropped an
That's a
apartment,
special
like an
permit.
apartment.
Into the
building?
campus. Yeah, into the campus.
Well, no, because once you get into the campus is mixed use. So 40% of the campus has to be commercial.
Okay,
If you put an apartment complex
yep.
in, or an apartment complex is not mixed use. I mean, I guess technically you could make it campus, but
Yeah, I think you can put anything in.
usually if you're gonna, in the limited space that we have, if you build an apartment complex, it's gonna be a singular building, I think.
Okay.
And again, it's probably going to be on one of the school properties.
Yeah.
It's not going to be, and it's going to be out for RFP. It's not going to be an apartment complex really getting dropped.
right, she doesn't live in a, it's 2/3 of her income is paid, and
Does it look like a house or is it a community?
it's a three-story, right behind the police station. It's brand new. They built it, there was one, and they built a second one, 3 years ago.
But still,
And they have
it's
like a-
larger buildings.
Yeah, they have a
Bunch of people
community
there,
room, yeah.
Yeah, it's an assisted living facility, essentially.
So you're thinking of senior,
Please have a nurse.
senior
No,
housing
but it
campus.
probably functions in multiple
Any
ways.
campus, yeah.
Maybe.
Assisted
And
living
that's
would be a
essentially what this
business.
place in Groton is.
If it was assisted living, it would be a business, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
so that's commercial.
To your point, if they can make the math work, as long as 40% of it's commercial, it's knock yourself out.
But that's only, again, if it's campus.
That's
If
only,
it's a singular building,
then it falls under the other.
then it falls under the apartment complex. And I think that you could probably,
So what this would say is if you get rid of one I, basically you could drop an apartment building in a campus, surround it with a few retail buildings. The campus as a whole is, let's say, 40, 60. You've met the guidelines.
the first floor of all the buildings needs to total less than
That's what
25.
I'm saying. If you strike number one,
Oh, yes, yes.
you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
You got a nice campus.
Correct.
You got your, people who are a little bit physically challenged.
If you strike number one, you eliminate you could have a
Yep.
apartment building as one of the buildings within the
Yeah,
campus.
and I suspect any other developer that's not going for something that specifically needs residents on that, like a elderly complex, they're gonna go for this, naturally are gonna go to put their retail, commercial stuff on the first floor anyways, probably.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we're not
We
tampering.
can't strike it, because if we strike it, there's nothing preventing from putting a large retail establishment in, or a large commercial establishment in, and then a bunch of houses around it. too.
And I also think that, you know,
Because those houses then would not
Well,
qualify.
each use has to be a,
No, you're saying if you strike the first floor residential clause, then you just have to say 60% of the total of the development.
well, still, each individual use, each structure in there would still need to meet the by right uses outline, so all this, it does, so campus district is like other regulations plus, so, you know, so.
yeah, because the single family would be a prohibited use.
Or
would be
special
by
permit.
special
or-
permit. So you'd have the opportunity to,
Okay.
I guess though, if we're talking about having a singular residential building, and we're talking about putting, you know, first floor units to make them accessible, we're probably getting into a multifamily building where there's 4 or more units, so we're talking about elevator installation anyway. So spreading out the commercial amongst all the buildings and adding elevator to have accessible units is probably something that is going to happen in the other buildings anyway.
Okay.
So you may not, I think there's a perceived problem that when you start actually laying it out and applying codes and stuff to it, doesn't exist because they're going to be required to install those elevators based
Okay.
on either the uses on the second floor or the number of units, and that's going to make those buildings accessible in and of itself.
Yeah, so I don't want to drag this out. I'm cool with whatever. I just wanted to have the conversation. I think it's a good conversation, so I'm cool.
Just for clarity, isn't any retail commercial space on a second floor require accessible access?
Retail, yes.
Retail, yeah, I think.
On a second floor, it requires either an escalator or an elevator, right?
Yeah, unless it's just, I'm not even sure if a new building can do it, but if it's just an office that just serves employees.
Okay, that's
It doesn't need
different.
to be
Right, it's not
accessible,
open
but
to the
anywhere where the
public.
public's going.
Right.
It's gotta be accessible.
So a lot of these mixed-use, multi-story retail second floor, they're gonna have to have that anyway.
If they have retail on the second floor.
That's why I'm
Typically,
thinking
the second floor
probably
is gonna
won't.
be apartment.
Exactly.
And I don't mean to belabor, I just want to make sure that we're not making it that the Passio or the primary school, if we were to go as a town out to bid to make that a senior living, that we're not restricting it for that capability.
Well, if we submit an RFP, then don't we have control over the proposal?
It's still got to meet this underlying zoning, though.
Of course, right. But
So what she's saying is by zoning this, we're not eliminating that as a possibility.
I don't want someone to say, you know, you have to have 3, what, I don't even remember what the
You can
numbers are.
still put them
You
on the
said so
second and
many of them.
third floor. I mean, it's
I'm
just,
sorry?
you can still put elderly housing on the second and third
The
floor.
Passios doesn't have second or third floor.
I think she's talking about reuse of the existing
Just
building, so that
simply
would
using
be,
building.
If we strictly reuse TC Passio, and we're saying that the first floor has to have commercial in it, and someone wants to put in senior
Oh,
development.
didn't we, I thought we talked about adding the line of
yeah,
excluding existing building.
Yeah.
New
This
construction
is
only we're
only for
talking
new
about.
Okay, so this is only for new, that's what I'm asking.
10%.
I thought that's where this conversation started.
Well, we talked about it for the glazing, but I think we could apply it to this as well.
no, we talked about it, well, retail operations for existing buildings.
I just don't want to hurt ourselves.
And then I think we just talked about it again for the glazing, or no? We didn't.
Okay,
No, I
so
thought we
we're-
talked about it again
okay.
for this particular line.
I'm starting
Let's
with
pause
glazing.
for a second.
Paula, what? I'm sorry?
We're-
Like you said on these, that's what you're gonna add the clause.
Right. New constructed buildings in. I think that's where the conversation started.
Yeah, 9.
But
Yes,
that-
that's
but-
where it started, but then we went,
Okay,
In big
can I
circles.
finish the statement that I started?
please.
That's for campus buildings. If we're reusing the TC Passios, that is an individual structure, it's not a campus. If it's only living units, it's an apartment complex or a condo development, which is special permit, and doesn't fall to the 25% or the 10% or any of that. It's
But you couldn't make-
singularly living space.
But you could make a campus out of TC Passios by splitting it up into multiple
Yep.
buildings and putting a parking area in there. And I actually saw a neat little concept plan to that effect.
Honestly, I think if you're going to start chopping that building, you're better off knocking the whole thing down.
Now, also, we've got a maximum floor space of 5,000 square feet for,
For retail use.
right? No.
We excluded that for existing buildings too, right?
Correct.
So if it was going to be a commercial assisted living, would that still be
No, I mean,
required?
you get into Dover Amendment issues with that, and that's a commercial business, but it operates residentially. Those people are living
It's a
there.
residential use.
Yeah.
I get you.
Okay.
All right, I don't have anything else, and I think other than that, we're looking, from my perspective, real good in the VCD, and that's all. Do you guys have anything else?
Anything else on the village district? From our board?
Nothing.
I'm good.
Anything else from the historical on the village? Before we go into the, before we go into the, let's wrap up the village. Any public comment on the village before we go into the AP? Okay, now let's go into that. I think my chair went down again.
So this was actually the 20th. This is actually the March 2nd.
I don't even know where to begin, but I want to be able to be much more concise and give this as an overview instead of a blow-by-blow, piece of this. Basically, this architectural preservation district is a response to the village district. We, in the process of you people coming up with this village district, had been very interested in going to your meetings, being able to be part of some of the design standards of what was going to happen, because this is in the same area as our own historic district.
Rebecca, I'm sorry, but the mic is really quiet. I'm wondering if maybe we can adjust it so we can hear you better.
Do I have to get this close? Eat it, okay.
You can maybe move it forward, like move it up in the clamp for you there. Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay. Now I feel like I have an echo everywhere.
That's good, yeah.
We wanted to be part of your village district, and when it all came down to the fact that yours was all about what you wanted it to be, and you had left no space for us to be able to do this, this was the response. We came...
I want you to stop right there, because that's not
Well, we
an
came-
accurate statement. We had,
People came, they sat, and they sat, but then when it came to historic preservation, it was like, okay, last minute...
No, hold on.
no.
Yeah, I got to object to that, because
That's why we were very
We
strong.
worked with Adam. We said we were not going to move this forward on town meeting. We still say,
Without you.
if we don't get a good APD together that we're confident can protect the historic structures of the town center from demolition, we're not going to move forward with a VCD. And we've been working with Adam to help make sure that this happens.
We heard about an architectural preservation district no more than a month ago.
Because there took some time for us to, this is a
That was
good
before the
historical
new
point.
year.
So we've been talking about historical preservation for a while. What Adam did to help us out was he went and did some research. We were talking about the importance because, as you said, I mean, the Village Center District bylaw does change the zoning regulations a lot and opens up a lot of possibilities and could make the town center much more attractive to different levels of commercial development. And while we're excited about that for the reasons we laid out, we're also, I think, just about everybody in this room shared some really serious concerns that doing that in the historic district could create incentives for people to demolish historic structures. So we agreed very early on that we needed to find a way to, if we're going to adopt this, find a way that could allow us to be confident that the historic structure would be protected. Now, we didn't know what that way was, and we asked Adam and I think some people from
Chantel.
MRPC before that to research it, and Adam identified or worked with you guys to identify the APD. So that might have been 2 months ago, 3 months ago, but this conversation around preservation has been around since the inception of our work on the Village
And
Center
that's
District.
why we came to your meetings and we sat through your meetings and we wanted to be part of it. And then all of a sudden it was like, well, we're waiting for our turn, we're waiting for our turn. And then it was like everything's being laid out. And then it was like, oh, and now come up with something that will be the preservation piece yourselves. And that's when Adam mentioned this architectural preservation district to us. The only other thing that we were aware of was a historic district ourselves, which we had not done any of the legwork to get that off the ground. So If we seem a little bit disorganized and unorganized, it's like we've been scrambling very quickly.
Yeah, no, I
to be
can
able to
appreciate
try
that short
and,
notice for you guys.
get this in some sort of fashion that we can actually present. So basically, what this the Architectural Preservation District will do is that it will overlie this village district, but it'll also include all of the historic districts. So our boundaries are a bit more than yours, but we don't see where any of this would impact on those people. Making that more, just to give people an overview, the historic district goes from the center of town down Leominster Road to as far as Fairview, down Lancaster Road as far as Rolling Acres, goes down Mass Ave to include the Brooks House, and then goes down Oak Ave to include just before the TC Passios area, and then goes down Mass Ave in the other direction. It just misses St. Boniface Church, is my understanding there, but includes all that area in total. And it also does some strange little thing in the center of town, and it does not include the primary school building, the old primary school building, for some reason. Don't ask me why. But that's, otherwise it follows the roadway, yes.
Sorry to jump in. You raised, can I ask a question for you and for Adam especially right now? So one question I would have is,
With the maps.
what's the exact overlay? Does the historical district perfectly contain? Because that might be an issue, especially if we're relying on it.
It doesn't. It eliminates Passios primary school, and there's some outlying properties.
Well, it goes down as far as Brooks. So take a line from the driveway,
Right, because we go to the Passio.
and that would get you into the Passios.
Well, these outlines are quite different. I had asked before if they were the same, and I thought I was told that they were.
And again, I didn't have a map of the historic district.
But-
I made the
But in
inference that they
truth,
were.
what it says here is that we encompass both our historic district and your
Okay,
village
it's like the
district. So
superset.
it-
The APD would apply to the
They would go for
union of the
both.
two. Okay.
in those areas. And basically what would happen with this, if we did this, is that this goes to town meeting. The Board of Selectmen, if this was approved, would appoint the 5 members. Those 5 members have varying staggered terms as to how they get on. It says that that commission would be comprised of a member of the Lunenburg Historical Commission. It would also have a design professional.
Bless you.
A craftsperson, a building contractor familiar with historic restoration, and 2 residents that are within that architectural preservation district. Those people would comprise this. There are, as we've discussed briefly, was that they would come up with the design standards. Those things would then be notified through a hearing that would be advertised in the newspaper, and then those design standards would then go to the Board of Selectmen. It goes in here as to what are exempt from this bylaw, things like routine maintenance of the building, repairs or improvement that do not require a building or demolition permit from the building inspector, temporary buildings subject to time, size limitations, interior buildings alterations. We're not interested in the inside of anybody's houses. Exterior building colors, we're not interested. We're interested in paint. We're not interested in what color it is. Installation or replacement of storm windows, doors, screen doors, regular doors. Removal or replacement of gutters, downspouts, water, windows and door shutters. Removal of substitute siding from a building. We're not interested that you take it off. We might be interested if you put it on. Structures not defined as buildings or parts of buildings. And reconstruction of a building that has been damaged by a fire, storm, or any other disaster, and stuff. those would not be of our concern. It then goes into what, if people are going ahead and doing construction, or they're planning to do some sort of alteration, that they would want to come through voluntarily to talk about what their plans, their building plans are, so that they don't run into the expense of having to have already done all this building plans and then realize that they're not going to conform with what we're doing. So that there is a non-binding review. And they would also get guidance from those people within this commission as to what could they change that would then give them the green light. So they're not just here as a negatory board, they're also here as an advisory board to get these people to be able to pass.
Could I ask you a question about that, Rebecca?
Yes.
So you mentioned that it's a recommended review,
Yes.
and then you also mentioned so that they can avoid investing in plans and not having them done. So I guess, yeah, it's recommended that you get the review, because if you don't get the review, you might not be able to do the plans. But I guess there's something, I'm not against what you're proposing. I guess it's just when I originally read recommended, I got a different feel from it. Like, oh yeah, we'd like to give you feedback on these things, but you can, it's not, we'd like to give you feedback, but you can do whatever you want. It's like, we'd recommend you get this review because otherwise you might not be able to do what you want.
Well, then you're going to get into expensive design reviews, getting into architectural plans to have to be altered and everything else. That's going to be an additional expense to people if they have these things all done. So if they come to us with, sort of a vague proposal, this is what we're generalizing, thinking about and stuff, then you can give them some guidance as to, well, this wouldn't necessarily fly, this will fly, have you thought about doing it this way, that way, so that they don't get concrete and then it's an expense. It's meant to be friendly, not adversarial.
I'm just, on this, kind of the same point, I'm still a little confused, and I apologize. On these recommended things, what's the mechanics that are involved? So let's say I'm gonna replace my windows with triple pane for better insulation purposes. That's it's an alteration which is just recommended but not required. If I choose not to go through the review process, does the APD get involved at all?
It says here under the exemptions that we're not interested in the installation of replacement or storm windows, doors, screens, and all that sort of stuff. So if you want to go to triple pane type things.
So if anything in section 7 that says it's recommended but not required, is there anything else that has to be done if I choose to not go to the APD because it was just recommended and not required?
Eventually, if something you've done to the facade of your building and you haven't come to us for a review before, it could be then knocked in the review.
It could be then what?
It could be then come up as, no, that's not going to be allowed. So say you decide that I'm going to...
That's what I'm asking the
Okay,
mechanics.
so say I
When does it
decide that I'm going to
secondary
replace windows,
require review?
okay, which is not going to be an issue, but you decide to replace your window with 3 large picture windows across the front instead of the colonial windows that were in the front.
I think you
Yes.
could pull a building permit for that, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Okay? That might trigger the review. That will trigger it.
So when you get a building permit, that triggers the APD review?
Does it say that?
Yep.
I know, none of that seems to be in here, so I was just trying to figure out what the mechanics of it are.
Yeah, so what, Adam, what's your understanding of like, so how that would work? You mean, would this, if we pass this today, would the building inspector understand that?
Okay.
Well, I'm not going to speak for the building inspector. I don't think that it's as clear cut as that, because advisory review is recommended, but then it says the following alterations require submittal of an application. Substantial exterior alteration to a contributing property.
That part is all clear to me. Section 8's really clear. I'm puzzled, I'm confused by Section 7. Section 8 clearly lays out kind of the process, because you have to submit an application, and it has to be reviewed and approved theoretically. My question is, if it falls under Section
All right.
7, how does it get rejected?
Okay, I'll see, I can give you an example. It says storm windows are not an issue, so you can put a storm window on, but it says replacement of windows, doors, trims, and stuff that are significantly different. So you want to replace your windows. You want them to be, more thermal, you want them to be more energy efficient, okay? If the current window there is a 6/6 design, then your window replacement should be a 6/6 design or 9/9 design, that type of design, so that the look from the outside of the building, it can be a newer window, it just should be looking the same. So it should be that 6/6 to the 9/9, whatever.
Becky, that's not what I'm asking, though. What I'm asking is, if it's just a recommended, which means it's not required review, how does it get reviewed?
So if he goes from 6/6 to 4/4.
Right. But I didn't go through a review.
He just
because
went and
it
pulled his
said it was
building
only
permit, he
recommended,
met all
not
the
required.
requirements.
So where does it then get reviewed and you say, no, you can't do 4/4?
Because Rebecca drove by your house and saw what you were doing
Yeah?
and said, you can't do that.
Yeah.
So is that really the enforcement plan? Is that we're gonna, after people are doing construction, we're gonna go look and tell them to stop?
No.
Okay,
It's
so
the
that's
fact
what
of the
I'm
matter
trying to
that when
understand.
you go to the
Process.
you go to the building inspector and say, I'm going to be doing this thing and I'm pulling a permit to go ahead and do this,
Yep.
then part of what they are going to do is that it's going to say, oh, that triggers an APD review.
Not if it's in the recommended section. If it's section
No.
8, then they would say, that triggers a review, because this requires a review. But if it's section 7, it just says, he's just gonna say, if I was him, I can't speak for him, but
There-
if I
there's
was him,
thing-
I'd say, hey, by the way, you're doing something that a review is recommended, you might wanna talk to them.
Right.
And then you can choose whether you wanna talk to them.
These things here are example of those things that that we recommend you come to you beforehand, so that you don't go ahead and then purchase all those 4/4 windows. And now you come to us and said, oh, I'm pulling the permit, I already bought my 4/4 windows. And we're saying, no, you had 6/6 windows. You can go return those 4/4 windows because they're not going to be allowed.
Then I wouldn't make this recommended.
So that's
I would
why
make
they're-
all of these required, because what you're saying is it basically is required.
What they're saying is that you should go, yes, they are.
Required, right?
They
So
are.
You require approval
Right,
of
so
all
they're
these
sitting there saying
changes.
they're giving you examples of what things that that will be required, so come to us beforehand, okay? What is in here, for example, are things that are going to trigger a review, okay? They're facade, they're on the front of your building, those are gonna think, so come to us and talk to us beforehand,
That's not at all what it says.
okay?
what it says.
Because
Might be what you intend, but that's not what it
So the
says.
feedback to you is to modify, I would combine section 7 and 8 and just say these all require the APDC review, and you can include the listing of those things, because you do require the review of the
Yeah.
windows that I've
Okay.
chosen. You're not recommending that you review them, you are requiring that you review them. So it shouldn't say recommended, because that leaves it up to the homeowner to decide whether or not they want to consult with you.
Well, and I think that also, if you look at section 8, substantial exterior alteration to a contributing property, there's no definition of substantial exterior
Right.
alteration.
And in truth, this is still, I should have draft written over this. I thought I'd gone through and pulled all of those things. There was an initial standard in here that said there was a difference between an alteration that was substantial and gave some size requirements and others, and we pulled that. We don't want to get into, well, this one is just a little bit and this one's not enough, and we didn't want to do that. We're like, if it's on the facade of the building, you're going to talk to us. It doesn't matter if it's small, little, or in between, you're going to talk to us about what's happening facade-wise on this
So
building.
you should combine section 7 and 8 and just say alteration, example of alterations would require APDC review.
Right, because you
Should be in
said
your
you don't care
recommendation.
about storm windows, that's what you said up front, but
Right,
now.
the storm window
it's
we
very
don't care,
possible that-
but the window itself, yeah.
You do,
We
right.
do.
It's possible that you adapted this from a town that
But you
really
do
didn't
care-
care about the replacement windows, and that's why they said it's just recommended, not required. But here in Lunenburg, what you're saying, it's required, so. you
Anything to
shouldn't
do with the
have
facade,
recommended
the front of the building is required to come see you.
Yes.
So that's just what the document needs to say.
If that's what it's, okay. So we'll,
Nothing should be recommended. If you
Just-
want to see them
right.
with anything with that
Just as you people have
facade.
discussed back and forth, we too need to still
Yeah, oh, no,
tweak this
that's what-
document.
this is
And
what-
that's what I'm.
And that's what this
I
is
like
for.
hearing and stuff, so that we'll do that.
Yeah.
There, it goes on further as to how you have to go ahead and trigger this application process. It would basically come out of going to the building inspector, pulling a permit, and then these, because it's going to deal with the front side of the building, then you're going to have to go through this review, and letting these people know this up front, that just like you're going to pull a wiring permit or this permit or that permit, you need to go through this. It goes through then specifics about how long, the time requirements and stuff for that to actually happen. Design standards. There are some broad outlines of design standards that go in here that look at height and proportion, so that it basically says the height proportion relationship to the heights and width between windows, doors, signs, other architectural elements should be compatible with the architectural style and characteristic of the building and the structure. So they're going to look at that specifically. So we're not going to have, things.
I'm sorry, can I make a comment? Is this going to need to be proofed by legal? I mean, for enforceability? Because
This-
you should never say should in bylaw.
No, I agree. I think that, again, I'm stepping on a limb, I haven't gone through town meeting here, but generally, when a warrant is submitted and finalized, it goes through legal for
Okay.
review. I don't know if that includes bylaw review in the town of Lunenburg. Many towns do that. I agree, it should be shall.
Yeah, so-
Instead of should.
So whenever
Okay.
you do say should, if you're actually meaning it's a recommendation, then it should be
May.
phrased differently?
If it-
Recommendation should not be in a bylaw.
Okay,
As a person who makes his living reviewing and interpreting bylaws for private people, for
Right.
private development, I would just glance over something that said recommended.
Yeah, as soon as you see should, you just,
Yeah, no, it's got no weight. There's no,
Okay.
no enforceability.
sit there and say it should be compatible, okay.
Bless you.
The further on it goes down is to relationship of structures and spaces. The relationship of the structure to the open space between it and adjoining structures should be compatible with such a relationship in the district. So it's basically saying that although you're looking for dense development, it's saying there should be the residential flow that is currently right there. So that there should be a lawn, there should be space between the buildings, they shouldn't be abutted one right next to another. But that is strictly for those that are there. Shape, the shape of the roof, the windows, the doors, and other design elements should be compatible with the architectural style and characteristic of the building. So, does this mean that you can suddenly add a glass tower onto a 1700 building? No, it doesn't. So that would be an example of that. Scale, it says the scale and structure alteration should be compatible with the architectural design style and characteristic of the district. So Damon, the building that you did for the alteration and change for the Brooks House, that is a compatible design standard so that it keeps the relative look of the 1870s building that it is. It keeps the windows still compatible, the roof line, everything is integral. So that is the kind of thing that they'd be looking at, that it fits the neighborhood. It isn't the oddball in the neighborhood. directional expression, so building facades and other architectural design elements should be compatible with those of the districts with regards to dominant verticality, horizontal expression, directions related to the use and historical character and appropriate. So you don't want to suddenly have this huge building where everybody's in a smaller scale. So they don't want it to be the oddball out stuff. Garages and accessory buildings. Garages and accessory buildings should be sensitive to be integrated into the overall development and should not be the prominent design feature when viewed from the street. So if yours is behind and nobody sees it from the street, you're not going to be talking to people. But if it's alongside, adjacent, that it should be compatible with where you're at. And then it gets into materials and methods of construction.
Kind of dangling. Are you guys going to finish that, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
We will. The next thing just goes into how they would actually give you the permit, where it would go, how it would happen. Enforcement. This was lacking in the New Ipswich document that we received, and we discussed this, is that we wanted this to be compatible with the demolition delay bylaw, and that it says that if you violate this, that there would be no building permit shall be issued with respect to any property within the APD that violates this bylaw. It's set for a period of 2 years, you won't get a building permit. And that's exactly how the...
Can we do that?
Yes, the demolition delay bylaw says that.
I guess my question to that is, what about instances where repair is necessary to eliminate demolition by neglect, or there's a valid permit requirement for
Get a building
that building within that 2-year period? Is there some language or ability to do that? I mean, we're talking about an existing building, so if somebody goes and puts 4/4 windows instead of 9/9 windows, and we bar them from getting a permit within 2 years, and they have an ice dam that threatens to potentially ruin their roof in the first 6 months after that, we're actually causing more harm by doing that than good.
No, the thing that would happen is that if you go ahead and you put in the 4/4 windows and you didn't pull a permit, then you're going to remove those 4/4 windows, or else you're not going to get a permit. You can then, you're not going to be allowed to do it.
Well, I don't need the permit, my windows are in.
What? Oh, yes, you do, because can you go ahead and you have to get a permit to do windows anyways? Don't you need a building permit? Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. So you've violated not only the town laws, now you've also violated its design laws.
I don't think we're questioning about not pulling the initial permit. I think the question comes from the enforcement, which says that no building permit shall be issued with respect to any property that has a violation. So I have this violation, let's say I pulled the permit and for whatever reason it slipped through the cracks and I violated the APD, and you're trying to enforce this. So you say, oh, I can't have a building permit for 2 years, and then I have to put in a handicapped ramp. You can't prevent me from pulling a building permit to do that. Well, I can't see how we could prevent that.
You want to put in a handicap ramp because of your building, then you need to come and talk to us about how you're going to go about doing that. It doesn't mean that there will be no handicap ramps ever allowed on a building in this district.
No, I was simply addressing the no building permit shall be issued for 2 years. I was just saying, I don't know, how do we...
Well, because the basic thing is that what we've run into with the demolition delay bylaw is that many people think, okay, I'm going to go ahead and I want to demo this building, and so before I even go to get the demo permit, I've decided to remove all the windows, I've decided to strip all the floorings, I've decided to, ask all my buddies and anybody else that wants to take any sort of historic artifact out of the building, and now it's open, okay? And now all of a sudden, I'm ready to get in the heavy construction materials to come in, to remove the rest of the building, and I go to pull up a permit. Now, I've caused this building to be demoed because of what I've done. I've left it open because I don't have any windows anymore, because my buddy wanted those. And I took out the floor because, hey, there's good money in recycling those kind of woods. And I've stripped everything else out of it. And now I've left this empty shell of the building that then makes, the fire chief can get involved, and he can sit there and say, whoa, vagrants can come in here, this is all. Now you've caused the demolition of a building, all right? So that's why we got into, you're not going to get a building permit.
So that's more a demolition by neglect type thing where this comes into play, so.
And there is a clause in here about demolition by
Right,
neglect.
So maybe for this enforcement clause really sounds to be very specific to demolition by neglect, not the example that we said where I put in the wrong kind of windows that didn't necessarily comply with APD, so they're not gonna let me get a building permit for the next 2 years unless I change them.
Well, the thing is that that's why we want you to,
Maybe section 11 needs a little bit of expansion and clarity around the types of things you're trying to protect.
Right.
And how you're going to.
right, so that's why the design review, come talk. Don't spend money. If you got the front of your building is where you're going to be doing some sort of alteration change, no right up front. This is what's going to require some sort of review. Know before you purchase something that this is what's going to be allowed and not going to be allowed.
I understand what you're saying, Becky. I'm just trying to provide you some feedback on how to redo section
But
11.
I guess the thing that I find and have found in the past is that if you have no recourse,
No teeth.
then nothing, no teeth, then, oh, come on, just let it slide. It'll be all right. It was my buddy. Oh, we forgot to do this, we forgot to do that. And so it slips slides and everything goes down. Everything gets altered, everything gets changed. And so there's got to be some recourse. There's got to be something that makes people set up and take notice as to why you want to do this. Yeah.
I think what Ken's saying is that you're applying a very specific and very grand punishment to a very nuanced approach to the APD. I mean, there's a lot of different things that could constitute a violation of the APD, and there's a lot of specific instances where a building permit may be necessary within that 2-year period for something that has nothing to do with the initial violation. So perhaps the prohibition of a permit for a 2-year period is applicable in certain instances of violation, but there may be other instances where a violation has other requirements for enforcement. I think he's just saying that, there's the possibility for other nuanced enforcement, fines, those kind of things, and over time, fines can become liens on property and they don't necessarily solve the initial alteration, but they create an impetus for somebody to want to take it upon themselves to figure out what the solution to either not paying those fines or having that lien removed is.
We went to this example mainly because it was the only one that was already in existence with the demolition delay bylaw. When we asked the town of Ipswich and their historical commission, they didn't have anything there. And so they really didn't have any guidance as to, what do you guys do? How do you get this enforced? How do you make people do what they do? And they didn't know. And when I mentioned this, they said, oh, we hadn't thought about that. So yes, could this be tweaked? Could that go to some sort of fining type standards? We can discuss it.
And I think that's just the point, is it's a good first start, and it starts the conversation, and it's not necessarily something that needs to come out, but this is much more than the demolition delay bylaw, where the building's gone. You're not saving it at that point, and you are actually punishing someone by taking their ability to get a building permit away. Whereas this, in 75 to 90% of the cases, the building's going to remain there regardless of whether there's a violation or not. And by taking away the ability to get a building permit, you may cause more harm to the character of the district than good based on why you might need to pull a building permit in that time period.
Right, but you also destroyed the facade on a 1700, 1800 home, you're not going to get it back either. So you've caused some significant damage, too.
You're correct, and again, maybe there's a varying degree of enforcement based on the degree of the offense. I mean, a 4x4 window instead of a 6x6 is, this kind of offense, and pulling all the windows out and, parking your car inside the front door is this kind of offense. So you really are dealing with quite a scale of things, and there needs to be a scale of enforcement, I think is, and we can talk about it offline about, some suggestions, and I'm not ready to talk about it, but I've done a little bit of research, and I have some other things that I'm looking at, so we can talk a little bit further about what those might be.
Okay. And then it just says the next section has to do with coordination with other town boards and bylaws. So it basically says that in the state of the establishment of this bylaw does not supersede or interfere with the regulatory authority of local boards and state boards. So we do have to work together to what we do. And basically the enforcement of this, it does include proposed demolition, including demolition by neglect. So we've unfortunately found that the people can get what they want if they just don't do nothing. And then buildings that are over 75 years of age. So that is also a trigger, making that incompatible with the demolition delay bylaw. So if there are houses that are not 75 years of age, potentially we can't talk to you about them. So those that are younger, and that's any building. So I don't think the TC Passios, does it make 75?
It's 50, right?
It's 50.
I
So
think it's 50.
it doesn't trigger
More than
us.
50 is built in the 40s, wasn't it? Late 40s?
Yeah, so it doesn't get 75. What does is the old primary building, because
But you said that's not in the district today.
it isn't currently in the
But it's
district.
in the village
But it's in the
district, so
village
it's covered
district.
under the
Under
APD.
Yes, but that's it. And I think that basically gets into it. The rest of it is legalese that came from the original bylaw that we had. And it does give you a process to go ahead and appeal, an appeals process with what any determination was.
So is there any other reference in here to demolition other than that, just that clause that says this kind of supersedes the other bylaw?
Is there any other reference to demolition?
Yes. I mean, there's definitions for demolition and demolition by neglect?
It's just demolition and demolition by neglect, that if you wanted to demo a building, you get into a process with the demolition delay bylaw.
So is that under section 8, which is considered an alteration requiring APDC review?
It's 8A is demolition of a building or part of a building.
Okay,
So,
it's A, okay, I got it. Just wanted to make sure it was there.
so I got a couple questions around enforcement, I guess. Is someone who's a proponent of the Village Center District, like, I'm really hoping that from an enforcement standpoint, we need something way stronger than demolition delay, like very large. So what the goal, one of the big goals as far as I mean, there's all kinds of preservation goals. Demolition, I think, is kind of like
You've
the
lost
number
it.
one for me. And I think with, given the incentives for development that we have here, which have their place, but they create a danger of demolition, I would encourage you guys to work with Adam and legal counsel to come up with really, to deter that kind of behavior, you may be talking about very serious fines. And having been on the planning board in the brief 5 or 6 years that I've been here, I've seen developers flaunt our bylaws, and I've been pained to discover that there is often slap on the wrist for enforcement. We can't afford that here. If we pass this village center bylaw and we don't have strict, legally tenable enforcement, I'm going to feel real bad.
I know, because the one thing I did see in the newspaper article, and it said that, are you still in agreement that if the village district bylaw and this one does not pass in conjunction, that you would remove?
I would, yeah, I wouldn't feel comfortable with the economic incentives we will have created that would jeopardize the historic district. I mean, I'm a real big proponent of the village center. I think it's a great way to revitalize, an important part of the town, and I think it'll be a meaningful benefit. But I think the risks are too great. I personally would not be able to support it without not just an APD, but an APD that I felt really had enough enforcement power to truly deter demolition. I mean, the other stuff, honestly, personally, I don't care about as much, I obviously want some level of design standards, just like we had in the other thing, but demolition is,
Right, in the whole thing with this, the design standards and stuff that are in here is just basically so that you don't keep altering a building to the point where, like, what's the point? It doesn't look like anything that it was originally at. So if you can't at least preserve the facade, so at least it can be some semblance, well, this is how it looked. Yes, it has some other uses, it's and stuff, but, because the example is like the corner house, all right? That's been a commercial building for a long time, pretty much since, last time I remember it being residential was somewhere in maybe the late 1960s, 1970s. Was the last time I remember somebody I knew actually lived there. So since then it has, but they have maintained it as this facade. It hasn't altered its appearance so greatly that you can't sit there and say, oh, this is the corner house, and this is where the Bibles were printed, and this is all this sort of, all the stories can still relate to it, instead of saying, my God, look at that Chuck E. Cheese right there. I was told that once was where Bibles were printed. How do they print Bibles at Chuck E. Cheese's? That's where we want to get away from.
Yeah, and so whatever you do, I would definitely recommend, work with Adam and get a level of enforcement that's going to be a significant deterrent to ignoring your board or the board that gets set up through this. That's what, my main comment. A couple other comments. In here it talks about applying to buildings older than 1900.
Right, that's what was in the original from New Ipswich, and so that's why this newer version is the one that we went through and tried to make it more in line with what we already have here, and that 75-year criteria is what is in the demolition delay bylaw.
That sounds great. One other thing. So you mentioned when we were talking about some of the design criteria, and I assume these would be elaborated in whatever process results in elaboration.
So those are the ones that once the group is designated by the select board, then those people would then come forth with very specific design standards that would come to public hearing, and that would ultimately be accepted.
Okay. So regarding that, thanks for clarifying that. Regarding directional expression, I guess that when you talked about, a lot of these made a lot of sense. So I don't. Yeah. The one that I had as you spoke to it, I had some thoughts about was when you were talking about. It talks about building facades and other architectural design compatible with those others in the district with regard to dominant vertical horizontal expression. Direction, maybe that wasn't the right one. No, sorry, relation of structures and spaces, that was the one. The relation of the structure to the open space between it and adjoining structures should be compatible with such relationships in the district. When I listened to you, it sounded like your interpretation of that was the current relationships in the district. And I guess I would hope is given that we're trying to pass the village district bylaw, which consciously and clearly alters those relationships, that this would be interpreted in the context of the new zoning.
Ideally, if you did this, you'd like to see the existing buildings they could be reused for different businesses that you have laid out, but they still remain the same look, the same distances, that those buildings aren't going to be altered other than what they have for an interior building use, okay? But you're not going to then, in their yards, suddenly add, something else, or in between their yards, add something else. And if you did add that something else, then it needs to be compatible that this is, the way it looks. I see that what you're doing with the village district is that for spaces such as the TC Pastios, okay, that's pretty much a wide open palette. If it's not going to be the school, then you can either use that, it isn't going to hit the qualifications for us anyway, it's not over 75 years, so it can be a blank canvas as to what it is that you're doing. Do you want to put something in there that looks like it belongs to Lunenburg? Yeah, that would be nice, instead of, that it belongs in any midtown, Midwestern town or someplace else, so that would be nice that it had a colonial aspect, a feel to it and all that sort of stuff. But will it actually hit us? No, it wouldn't. But if you went ahead and, if you were looking at the Ritter building, and wanting to reuse that, you'd like to see the facade stay the way it is.
Yeah, so I'm talking really, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I'm really talking about this clause about relation of structures and spaces, like where you talk about, the distance between buildings. The village center district bylaw in the changing of offsets and whatnot, and the design criteria that are there, sort of consciously tries to redefine those relationships for the zone. It doesn't try to just say, oh yeah, just do whatever you want, pack it in as tight as you want. It does define a set of relationships about streetscape and walkways and, what needs to be observed and, to where loading docks should be and where parking should be. So it's not like it's punting on that and saying, oh yeah, free for all, whatever it takes to get commercial in here. So it is very conscious, but it's also consciously different, I think, than the current some of the current spatial relationships in the district. It would support, additions to existing structures that brought them into closer proximity with adjacent structures. Mm-hmm. It would support, in some cases in larger lots, the development of parking lots in the backyard of the houses. And I guess that's why I say, I think, this relation of structures and spaces is a really important criteria, and you see it big time in this village district bylaw, both at the individual property level, and the campus also reiterates it, that there's certain principles of space and relationships that need to be observed with walkways and buildings. So it's very heavy on that, but these two bylaws are going to come into conflict if this were to be interpreted in terms of the current relationships, because what's being laid out here is a pattern of development and relationships that sort of supports an evolutionary trajectory.
And I think it's, again, trying to clearly lay out which board is going to handle which item. The preservation district should control protection of historic buildings and how the facades may look. But when you start talking about the scale and the site relationship, that kind of goes back to our court and the village district bylaw as we've written it. I think it's, again, clearly defining who's controlling which sector of the project, really. Project.
But then it does get into that section 12 where it says coordination with other town boards and bylaws. So it doesn't say, what it says is that this bylaw will not supersede or interfere with the regulatory authority of other local and state boards, okay, or other architectural districts, so that this thing would lay over it, but it would not be, it can't supersede. So if village district bylaw came in and APD came in, obviously your design standards are up and enforced, and then ours come after. So we can't go ahead and come up with standards that would then go ahead and interfere with what's going on.
And that's why I think having a planning board member on there to make sure that you're requesting something
And
that's...
so obviously it would be good, even if it was just an advisory, for when the people that are on this APD board get set up, that they actually have someone, maybe just as an advisory while they're setting up these design standards, that know exactly what was going on. And then, as you said, it's difficult to maintain yourself on two different boards. They could drop off once those design standards were were in place and then went to the select board, is where they're at. All right. I love.
Thanks, Rebecca.
One point that was brought up last week was that there's very few lots that are really large enough to be exploited or to be used to the extent that the APD, rather the village district bylaw sets out, like used to the maximum potential of dense development just because of the parking requirements and so forth, which brought up an issue, and I think this what Mr. Lockwood brought up also brings up the issue that how do we harmonize the patterns of development and the relations between buildings? Because I think it's true that a lot of the lots downtown are very small, and there's some larger ones that might be better suited for full development of, say, a 5,000 square foot retail space further on the margins of the village district. But what would define the appropriate pattern of development if say, there was a sort of disjointed pattern where the larger lots that were further away were being more fully developed, and then in between there was more of a residential feel to the town? I think it's I'm not proposing any particular solution. I'm just saying it's a very good point. I think it's something that we kind of need to think about and address. What is the standard?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, I think a lot of thought has been, not to say it's perfect and it should be reviewed and questioned, but in my opinion, having participated in the development of the Village Center District bylaw, which we've drawn a lot from the state model bylaw, I guess I'd say a couple things about that. One is I think while they are pretty different, I don't think they're necessarily disharmonious with, like, it's not going to happen all at once. So like you mentioned, it's going to be if there's going to be change with this thing, it's probably going to happen gradually. And so you'll have some areas that are more than others. But to Damien's point earlier, if you look at the center district right now, there's a lot of non-conforming structures. If you look at Main Street, if you look at your side of the street, you're set back 40, 50 feet. If you look at my side of the street, I don't know, depending on where we're much closer to the street, like 20 feet from the street.
It's closer. Some of them are closer.
Some of them are closer.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that, I think it's a valid question and an important question. I think because of the thoughtfulness that's gone into the new guidelines and the fact that I think most of those things that will be enabled will be relatively desirable. Yeah, you might get a case where a new structure's extending up closer to a boundary or another. I think there's enough, like even that, you get closer to the center of town, you get town hall, Kicks and Skills and Thrills, and the other building. I think we already have sort of a variety of patterns in the town center, so I don't think it'll be jarring, but I do think it's a question worth asking, and if people can come up with counterexamples where something that we support here would really disrupt what we have, and I think it's worth, understanding what that is.
I can come up with an example, is that there is right off of the Lower Common, there is a blue-green building that is there that has currently expanded their business from just being a cabinet maker, carpenter, who has now gone into going ahead and making a sawmill in the back, which is compatible with historic uses. But what if that became a full-scale Mackey's with, a retail space with, being able to get everything in the wood yard business, and especially since he owns all the land in the back.
Well, this particular district doesn't include his land in the back. It barely covers the house.
And stuff. Right, but that would be something that would be of a large-scale development.
And there's not enough land for a Mackey's on any of the parcels in the center of town, except for maybe Passios in the primary.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, you need as Damien mentioned, you have to find a parcel that large. How many Mackey's is probably like 20,000 square feet of just building space alone.
Yeah, at least.
No.
Yeah, it's got to be more than that.
I mean, if CVS is 13,
Yeah, it's,
Mackey's would blow through our retail requirements. So that's one issue. They're blowing through the requirements we laid out. They'd never get the parking. And the other thing is the facade would look significantly different than the existing Mackey's. So if the business were in fact contained within the building and the building met the size, that's a lot of ifs. Bottom line is that scenarios wouldn't be able to occur under the zoning that's being proposed. What could happen is a Mackey's about the 10th of the current size.
Small hardware store.
With inside a building that met New England style architectural design standards.
Right.
Small general store type hardware store or something of that could fit into the character and the criteria.
Right, but then also have a large retail lot in the back with, all
No.
sorts of wood products.
5,000 square feet for a new building. Unless they're occupying an existing building, you're not going to get one bigger than 5,000 square feet. And the post office is almost 7,000.
She raised the question about I don't think, do we have, that's a good question
Outdoor
about
storage
outdoor
is-
storage and whatnot.
Outdoor storage is usually a use, and it's usually outlined whether,
Okay.
and,
It's not a use
It's-
we've included.
well, and
Because we had that with Frost.
if something's not included or not expressly allowed, it's prohibited.
Okay.
So good test case. So that's the kind of thing we need to do, is take these test cases, run them by the zoning bylaw, and see if they cut. In this case, best we can tell, that wouldn't pass muster. But that's the kind of thought experiment you want to do.
Right, and the only other one that I've thought of is the old primary building site, is that because that it's a 40R, it can go up. You could get a sunrise tower there. You could do something of that nature there, because you can, even though the way it's zoned, it can be up to-
zoned industrial for?
The primary
No,
school?
40R would be residential. The town still retains ownership of that building. So in order to dispose of it, it needs to be declared surplus, and then we would have to go through either an auction or an RFP process. I imagine that with the work the board has put into the Village Center District, they, and I would work to convince the town manager that RFP is probably the more appropriate way to do it, because the town retains some control and direction on the reuse of the property, as opposed to auction where you're just selling it to the highest bidder and,
Right.
want to be done with it.
because there's several examples, like in Portsmouth and New Hampshire, where you have a very unique historical district, and 1960s urban development came along, and there are some skyscraper buildings that are, senior citizen housing and stuff like that, that they came in, and that's when they went, whoa, we did something wrong here, that these things don't jive.
I have some numbers for Mackey. They're on a 10.5 acre lot, and they have over 56,000 square feet of
Yeah.
finished area.
So that's bigger
Considerable.
than the Passios lot. It wouldn't even fit on the Passios lot.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, come to the mic. You gotta just come to the mic.
My question is this. Since, from the beginning, you've wanted to protect the historical preservation, is there any way that we can work together implementing what we're trying to accomplish here, opposed to going in and having two separate votes for the town? Incorporate what we want to accomplish to protect the preservation, and, somehow work it into your village bylaws, so that when the town vote, there's no,
Is there no way to do it?
Talked about it.
I'm sure there's a way to do it. I think that it's better to do them separately. The APD is a general bylaw, so it's not zoning, it's general. So it's outside of zoning, it follows a different set of approval criteria, it has a different sort of structure to it. The zoning, the village district is a zoning district, it's a zoning bylaw. So they're both separate articles. I think that if ultimately the final version of all of these is signed off on by both boards, they could be co-sponsors of the town meeting warrant article to show solidarity, and that, the two are sort of interlinked, and, we want to go forward and feel that the two are important and sort of buttress each other in moving the town forward, but I think combining the two, you get into a lot of nuance and complication, and if there's something that you want to change about the APD, or, you know, you're creating a commission, that commission's being granted powers to develop regulations and rules in and of themselves, and once you start trying to weave that into the zoning bylaw, it really sort of muddies things up. So I think logistically, separating them makes more sense.
So if there's any way that we can work together to make sure that when it comes time for the town vote, that this does not get pulled, because we're looking at the future of our town, 25, 30 years from now. So what we've all been trying to accomplish is saving that integrity. So help us. You can help us do that, and so.
And I think part of that is, working with the town manager who develops the warrant to have the APD be a warrant article that's prior to the village district. So if there's some issue where it doesn't pass, if there's some amendments made on town meeting floor that are antithetical to the nature of what you want to accomplish from it, and I'm gonna go out on a limb, because if I recall, the majority of the board has said that they'd be willing to pull the village district, then you get the opportunity at that point to sort of look at postponing it indefinitely and trying to figure out how to get the APD moved forward.
Yeah, not just willing, I don't want to speak for the whole board, but I would want us to pull it, yeah.
And we explicitly reference the APD in the bylaw, so our bylaw kind of becomes.
That's sort of, that was my thinking also.
Yeah. You can't refer to something that doesn't exist and makes it invalid, so we wouldn't even be able to move forward with it if it didn't exist.
So the bottom line is, this, in addition to the Village Center District, which is Ken is saying, we really depend on this APD, absolutely depend on it. This is also going to represent a really nice strengthening of architectural historic preservation in Lunenburg. This, what I think we're on track to create here is, I just think, far more effective than what we have with the demolition delay bylaw in terms of what it can achieve.
Well, the only other thing that we could do is ask for a 12-month demolition delay, but we went to the Massachusetts Historical Commission, and they came up with a 6-month demolition delay bylaw, correct? So if you can come up with something that legally we can do, that would be terrific, but this is the state came up with this.
Understood, yeah, no, I guess.
So now, next steps, will they go back, make edits, come back for the March 9th meeting? What is the?
I'm not going to speak for them on how quickly they can
I
turn
thought
things
you were
around.
working with them. I apologize.
I'm happy to work with them.
I
The
thought
Village
you
Center
were.
District hearing is scheduled for March 9th. It's been advertised. We scheduled this back before, Snowmageddon attacked Massachusetts. So unfortunately, we lost a few meetings of listening sessions. We tried to make that up with tonight. So I think there's the understanding that the hearing may go next week and then the 23rd.
Unless there's a blizzard next.
Well, shut your mouth down there, Hawaii. We just want to make sure that we get as much input as we can, and that we're not missing out on something. I think
Where's
that
the warning glow?
a week is probably aggressive for you to turn this around.
Houses?
The general bylaw doesn't require a public hearing. It just requires going on the warrant. So I don't know if you want, and I don't know what your schedule looks like as far as getting back.
Thank you. Well, because if my committee's saying they're going to pull our bylaw, if we're not with their bylaw, I don't want to print our bylaw on the warrant if we're not.
Well, I want to print it on the warrant, and then we pull it if we're not ready. But how much, all they have to be is on the warrant, does their whole APD bylaw need to be on the warrant? How much?
No, they could do a place card, well, for printed, go ahead, Bob.
Their bylaw has to be ready on the 23rd, substantially ready. So that, in order for
March
us-
23rd.
March 23rd. So,
I mean, I don't want to speak for them, and from what I'm hearing tonight, the substantial format of the bylaw seems to be there. There seems to be some detail issues that need to get hammered out, so I don't know, how the board wants to approach this. Again, I don't want to speak for the Historical Commission and say that they can turn anything around in 7 days, and probably more like 3 or 4 to give the board a little bit of time to review any alterations.
So what's your, I guess, without being too presumptuous here, what's your schedule looking like for the next 3 weeks? 'Cause if they are amenable to your professional assistance to help them power through it.
I can figure out a way to make it work.
Okay, that would be great. If you guys are up for that, I think teaming up with Adam could really help.
We have our meeting tomorrow night. I don't know if you would like to join us.
I have to look at my schedule, but if I can't be there, if you can forward me notes, and I can, forward you some notes, and we can kind of correspond written and figure that out. We can make it work.
Bob had something else, go ahead.
yeah, just a couple of comments. On section 7, which is the alteration for the recommended, I actually think that's the wrong title, because I think the intent of that is to say accessibility improvements, replacement of windows or doors, solar collectors, or other alteration not routine, doesn't require a full hearing, but we'll give you an opinion because it says later on, at the end of the section, the APDC will provide its finding in writing, and within 20 days will determine that they don't have to go further. So if they change the title for saying it's sort of like review light or whatever the appropriate review would be, is to say, you don't have to go through this whole process for windows and doors and solar collectors. We're going to look at it and say, okay, you can go ahead. Or if they come in with something really grotesque, yes, you have to go through the full thing. It may be an easy way to go through that. But this doesn't say it that way right now. So that was one thing on that.
Could
And
call
the-
it
So it's more
determination of,
fast track is possible as opposed to review is recommended.
That's right.
you
That's
call it
right.
determination of applicability, similar to Concom.
Yeah, that's right. The other scenario, when we were talking about various things of, I keep using the unintended consequences about the village district bylaw provides for a minimum front setback of 5 feet, and you talk Main Street, the left-hand side, there's one building, several buildings that there is a 0 front setback, but on the other side there isn't. So therefore, could people build another house in front of an existing house and add on to the building and bring it to the street within 5 feet? That would be something that would go here before the village, the APD, and the question becomes, is that something we want to do? So we're talking about infill between buildings, we're talking about infill in front of buildings, and that's the type of thing that would go through this process. So I would offer my services to work with the Historic Commission as well, having been on the commission in the past. But I want to make sure we're prepared for town meeting and we don't go in there unprepared for either article.
So as the emails go, grab Bob's in there as well. Perfect.
That's another really good example. I think that if those were, I can't help myself here, that if that came through, that would probably, if it was an addition, that would be one thing. And then the buildings would be integrated somehow. Yeah, it would get probably reviewed as a major alteration under the APD. If it was 2 buildings, that would come in under the campus bylaw, and that has pretty significant site design criteria, which probably what you're imagining wouldn't be met, both in terms of the offsets between buildings and the rules regarding, But great example. Those are the kind of things we need to run through the rules.
Okay, any questions from the board on,
Yes, if we had talked about separating the reuse or expansion of existing homes versus new construction straight up, one of them being reviewed by the APD and the other one not. Was that something that we were talking about, that we were in agreement on, or did we just talk about it?
I think there was just a discussion. I think that there was, again, I think there may have been a belief that reuse wouldn't require site plan, where it does, you're looking at the dual review on that, so dual review on new construction might, it might keep a continuity of development style.
Okay.
Again, I think that the conversation was had, I don't know that there was a final determination.
Well, if there was a final determination that they should be separated, then that's going to confuse things even further with the two different maps. I mean, I know we said the bylaw applies to both, the APD bylaw applies to both districts. So there's the question of, it's in the Village Center District, but it's outside the Architectural Preservation District. There's also for it to be outside the village and in the APD. And then there's a third option of they're both in. Can you foresee any potential conflicts there by having a different map?
No.
Have we specified any different treatment of either, or, I mean, I think it just actually came up tonight.
No, I think that the way that it's written is sort of a workaround for not developing a specific APD map due to lack of access to GIS services or other mapping services.
Oh, okay, I guess I was referring to the Historic District map.
Well, but I mean, that's the Historic District map. That was done probably when they created the Historic District. So they're taking the Historic District map and the Village District map and creating an amalgamation. So if it falls in either district, it falls within the APD.
So the jurisdiction and coverage of it is to be both.
Correct.
So if you fall in the Historic Village District, if you fall in the Village District or the Historic District.
You apply to the.
Correct.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's inclusive. So you'll never be in the Village District and not in the APD.
Right, but this Historic District is an overlay, correct?
For the purposes of zoning, it's irrelevant. If you can point to a map that says this is the outline, and you can produce that map to people.
It's even more simple than that. We can proclaim that the entire Village District is within the jurisdiction of the APD.
Correct, and it does do that.
100%.
Yes.
So we don't, regardless of map and regardless of what else the Historic District
Correct.
coverage is.
Correct.
We just say the entire Village District is covered by the APD.
And the Historic District isn't even really an overlay. It's a
Well, then,
conceptual federal
if you
designation.
do that, TC Passio would fall into APG. It doesn't matter if it's 75 years or 60. It's going to fall into them with that statement.
The property does, but the building's not
yeah.
subject.
That's correct,
Right.
yeah.
But there's also the underlying thing that some of these buildings that are within the APD's purview are zoned Village Center District, and others are zoned Residential A. So that doesn't, okay. I just wanted to point that out, because
Well, and I would think to separate them, as Rebecca has said, that their focus is the front facade. That's all they worry about, where we have so much more. So I would think they would come through us. Well, that's not so loud.
So one other thing, just as you bring that up, so if this passes, they'll redo the town maps about the
Yes.
district maps?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha, good.
Okay.
Oh, I know what it was, I forgot. One other thing. We need to think about how we want to deal with this thing that we discussed briefly, which is, I'm not going to repeat anything, all right, Ken?
He's working on that.
The difference between the interim period where the design standards are being promulgated by this new committee. Actually, you could include the time to form the committee and the time for them to promote. And then the onset of the VCD zoning. So maybe we want to include in the VCD that it's got like a 6-month delay, before it goes into effect or something like that, to give that body time to form and come up with a design standards.
They can. Right now, ours are more strict.
No.
Our-
What he's saying is,
Yeah, the VCD.
technically, as of the vote on May 2nd, the VCD exists.
Right.
And so even if the APD passes at the same meeting, on May 3rd, someone could file an application
Right, and there's
under
no
the
design
VCD,
guidelines yet.
and the APD would have no authority yet because they don't have any rules or regulations. Generally, they won't get authority until the rules and regulations are promulgated. So there is some conflict there. Let me think about that.
I think a delay is a great idea.
I just want to think about how to put the language in.
Not to be effective until the APD is
Yeah.
formulated its rules and regulations. Or
Right, yeah.
it's
I mean, it almost might be enough that we have the reference already in here to the APD design guidelines, and therefore you can't be compliant with our design guidelines until those design guidelines exist. And if those design guidelines don't yet exist, then you have to wait until they do before you could be compliant. Or is the default, if they don't exist, then there are none?
Because the bylaw exists. So it would say you're subject to that bylaw. You'd go to that bylaw and be like, oh, well, they don't have any regulations. They can't do anything to me. I'm going to go.
right.
I think we say we're subject to the regulations, don't we?
All right, well, you'll investigate that and get back to us. Okay. All right. Any other questions from the public? Any other questions from the board?
we got some public.
Oh, come on up. Sorry, Paul, I didn't see you.
I just really think you've got to look at that delay, because in the APD, it talks about there's deadlines in which the APD has to act, and otherwise it's a presumptive approval, so I think you've really got to think about that delay in both.
Thank you. So we'll have that for the March 9th?
Yes.
Oh. All right, any other questions on the village or the APG? All right. So March 9th, we have a public hearing for planning board warrant articles, followed by our regular meeting. March 16th is the town caucus. March 23rd is our next scheduled meeting. March 10th, we have a joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen at 7:30 PM. Okay. Any public comment is all set there? Any board comment? Any board issues, member issues?
Work issues?
Oh, yes, I do have one. Excuse me. Last meeting, I mentioned that I thought we should go from 5 to 7 members and/or get the alternates. The third one that I had left out, and I need to bring up now, is that we go from 2 meetings a month to 4. I think that we're busy enough that we can handle meeting every Monday. But that's just my recommendation.
I think those two things would those two things would need each other. You'd have to have more members to increase that.
All right. So do you guys want to give that food for thought, process it, and we'll talk about that? Can we put that on the agenda for March 6th?
March 6th?
I'm sorry, March 9th. I apologize.
Meeting Friday?
I apologize, March 9th.
That's the extra meeting.
Friday night planning, yeah.
So
All right,
this
do
month
we have
they
any
got
other
the-
member issues? Anybody? I've got a couple. I haven't been here for a month, so you know they've been piling up. My first is, and I, maybe Bob or Paula can help me, I would like the planning board to, town meeting, I don't want to call it a tribute. We always, kind of at town meeting, we do a retirement tribute. Marion Benson is off our records as of July of last year, so we missed town meeting. So I would like to present town meeting to her, name town, what is the right verbiage to use to utilize Marion and thank Marion, name the town meeting after her, whatever that is that they do. In regards for Marion Benson, she created the planning in Lunenburg. She was our first planning director. She contributed her time for 30 years. And I would like to write a letter to the Board of Selectmen requesting that tribute be made at the town meeting.
Actually, you want to bring it to, send it to Tim Murphy, moderator. He's in control of the town meeting.
Okay, so send it to Tim and then he'll,
Well, he would be the one that would
Okay.
authorize that to take place. The selectmen don't have a role in that.
Okay.
We'd support it, but
so do I have the support of the planning board to ask that the town meeting, that we write a letter to Mr. Murphy, moderator, requesting that?
I make a motion to the effect Joanna just described.
Second.
All in favor?
No.
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay, so we'll do that. And then the next, I have some sad news from me. It's with great regret that I am writing to inform you of my decision to resign my position on the Lunenburg Planning Board. I have accepted a new job opportunity. As part of my new job responsibilities, I have to attend bi-monthly meetings. Those meetings happen to fall on the same schedule as the planning board meetings Monday night. I thought about asking you to change the meetings, but I don't think I could do my job meetings, these meetings, MRPC, capital planning, plus where I work, we're building a new school, so I'm with the building committee as well as the school committee. So I think it wouldn't be fair to both. I will miss the planning board and the incredible people I've had the pleasure to work with throughout the years. I cannot thank my board enough for all the opportunities and experiences you have provided to me during my time with the planning board. The residents of Lunenburg make Lunenburg a great community, and I appreciate all of your support and understanding that you have given me over the years, and I wish you all the very best. Please let me know if I can be of any assistance. Best regards, Joanna Bellata Simeone. So that one's yours. So those were my only 2 issues. Anything else?
Well,
I would accept it.
I'd like to say, I'm sorry to hear that you're not going to stay with us, Joanna. It's been great working with you the past.
You're all fabulous. Matthew,
2 years.
you're fabulous. We've had our differences. It's all about heart. It's all about it's about what's best for the community and the town we live in. And you all strive for that. Marion strived for it. Toby, Tom Bodkin, we just all fought for what was best for Lunenburg. None of us had our own agendas or thought processes to what we're going to gain by sitting on this committee, and I'm proud to have worked with each and every one of you. You're great people. Our engineers, everybody has just been wonderful.
Yeah, I want to thank you as well, Joanna. It has been great working with you. You welcomed me onto the board when I joined, and I appreciate that. And I've seen firsthand exceptional commitment you made to the board of your time. I can't imagine putting in the time you did, and the assistance you provided, Marion, and the level of organization you provided. Before you were chairman, and in the excellent job of organizing you did as chairman, and pushed for some really important things, including getting Adam brought aboard, which was a really important step as well. So you've done an amazing job, and I'm sorry to hear you're leaving.
Me too.
Hope everything goes well for you.
Thank you.
The same here, Joanna. Thanks. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here. So thanks for helping me understand everything I'd be responsible for and getting me into this so that you get out. But we're definitely going to miss you on the board.
Thank you. You're all a great group of people.
Thank you for your service.
And good luck.
Thank you.
All right. With that, I would accept a motion. Thank you. And I can stay on, because I'm assuming at the caucus, they'll just do 3 seats versus 2. I don't think the Board of Selectmen would appoint someone now for a month span by the time you advertise it and interview. So if you need me for voting, for whatever, I'm here, I'll do whatever.
Yeah, are you planning to attend between now and town meeting?
I can, if you want me to, I can go through those. Meetings I can attend till we have my seat filled, because with 2/3 votes and whatnot, you might need me, so absolutely.
Yeah, I think that would be best.
So I could sit with Adam and we can kind of touch base on my school committee meetings and.
We'll talk about it.
All right.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you all. A motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Good night, Lunenburg.